Hi, it's Rob Bauer with Sharp College Football, and we're doing something a little different. Normally, we do team previews as we go through the season. I managed to get 2 of them done in a burst of incredibly mild productivity. And anyway, I'm excited because we're going to try something different and actually just preview into an entire conference here. Now, this is going to probably end up running to director's cut type length in previewing the SEC, because I'm going to do 5 minutes per school. And then we have a great interview lined up with Josh Pate. And I'm excited for everyone to see that. Josh Pate from Late Kick Live came on and helped us preview the SEC. So we're going to run through each team in the conference from an advanced stats perspective. If this is your first rodeo with Sharp College Football, I'm the econometrician that built BetaRank, an advanced stat system for college football. It's built on the same data that from the folks that provide data to the College Football Playoff Committee. So really high quality data. Yeah, and so this is going to be from an advanced stats perspective. We're going to run through how teams have performed in the past. We're going to run through their recruiting, their returning to production as calculated by Bill Connolly, and then we're going to run through the schedule, talk about some changes that may have be coming at quarterback or at the coordinators. But I'm really excited to see and preview this SEC, the conference. Right, like the conference itself, I think has been a bit top heavy. I think maybe a little bit more than I've wanted to acknowledge in the last couple of seasons. Georgia's really been fantastic the last 3 years. Last year they were really, really good, not as good as they were, and we covered this in last year's preview when we covered Georgia. The offense came back to earth a little bit under Mike Bobo. They were still excellent. They just weren't as good as they had been the prior 2 seasons. Coming into this year, this Georgia team, I think, clearly is the sort of leader of the pack, but the pack, I think, has gotten a bit better. It's not just Georgia's and Alabama, with maybe Tennessee or someone peaking up. The SEC, I think, should be really solid top to, maybe not to the bottom this year, but should be really solid. And adding Texas and Oklahoma certainly helps significantly, with depth. There are plenty of teams, I think, that in the expanded playoff that have a legitimate aspiration to make it to the playoff. And we're going to talk a bit about that. I would expect the SEC this season to get as many as 4 teams into the playoff. And I think that's really, really reasonable given the quality of the teams we're going to talk about. It's going to be a very, very different type of college football season when we are talking about teams that have a couple of losses and are not playing in their conference championship game. As making it into the playoff. I think there's some real positives for that, in keeping a larger, and as somebody that does run a website that keeps track of numbers for college football. Right now, up until the first couple of weeks of the season is really your best time for numbers. People kind of fans whose teams are dropping like flies as the season goes on. There tends to be a little bit of a loss of interest as time goes on a little bit in college football over the season. I mean, there's still really good numbers for the big games, of course. But a lot of fans will drop off. So I'm interested to see if the numbers peak up a little bit, and it does help with that. But it is going to be very different. You are going to be punished less for losses. In some sense, that does make the regular season matter less as far as results go. But you're also going to have teams. Last year, both Oregon and Georgia would have been the likely favorites going into the college football playoff. They both lost in their conference championship games. It does allow teams to sort of bounce back from a bad outing, bad day at the office. There is still a lot of luck in football. When coaches talk about caring about process and not results, what they're talking about is that there's a bit of a random component that can also determine results in there. So what's important is trying to do the process that will largely lead to results most of the time. Like I said, we're going to do about 5 minutes a team. That on its own is going to run for a good bit of time. We're going to run for more than an hour just previewing teams. And then also we are going to, we've got about 40 minutes with Josh Pate. This is going to run for a bit. I'm going to try to, when I release this video, make sure that I have timestamps put in so that, you can skip to what you want to see pretty easily. But tune in as much as you want. I think we're going to do a really good job previewing the conference. I'm really excited about the visuals I have for each team. I think he does a really good job walking you through what each team looks like from an advanced stats perspective coming in. Josh Pate does a really good job. I think he does a really good job covering all of college football. But he did a fantastic job helping us get down to the nitty gritty of who, in the same way, in a way that as if we had been able, I think, to talk to a beat writer from every team, get down to a lot of personnel and have a real idea of stuff that is not going to be covered by advanced stats. Who is the coaching staff really excited about? What are they talking about? We got a lot of insight in that. So, yeah, I mean, if you just want to skip to the end, I'll make sure there's a timestamp in there for that too. So without further ado, because it's gonna be a good run through here. I would also say, and do me a favor with this. Don't respond and don't put in the comments some counting stat of this team was actually blah 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 points per game. This is do yourself a favor of trying to and I ask it in a good faith effort kind of way, not in a condescending way, a good faith effort kind of way to try to understand what we're going for here, which is stats that are controlling for tempo, controlling for opponent quality, controlling even for garbage time and whether what state the game was in, controlling for starting field position. All of the stats where you're going to see are controlling for those things at the very least. Pure counting stats don't do any of that, and so they're not really they're useful but not as useful as advanced stats are. So let's hop in. Let's get this started. All right. Let's get going with Alabama. The Alabama Crimson Tide and we're going to do this alphabetically, by the way, come in projected at number 7 coming to this season. Of course, this is the post Nick Saban era. The greatest coach of our time and a very good argument for all time has moved on. And I thought Nick Saban's superpower was hiring as well as recruiting. His ability to replace coordinators, which is one of the hardest things to do. And I have to hire people. It's just part of my job. Hiring is hard. Anyway, the Tide came in. They have a new head coach, Kalen DeBoer. They have a new offensive coordinator as well, Nick Sheridan, who has been with DeBoer since his time in Indiana. He did replace DeBoer as the offensive coordinator at Indiana and was subsequently fired for doing a really, really bad job. Then he went to Washington and coached on DeBoer's staff. My expectation is that he will not be the terrible Nick Sheridan of Indiana and that Kalen DeBoer will be there to keep the training wheels on and hold his hand as he coaches the offense. Kane Womack is back also from the Indiana days. He went on from DC at Indiana to be the head coach at South Alabama. Did a fantastic job there, likely angling to jump right up to an SEC job from Alabama DC after also doing such a great job at South Alabama. Really good defensive coordinator, well regarded. I think this is a really good hire. Offensively, Alabama struggled a little bit last season, falling all the way down to 20 with Tommy Rees calling plays. My expectation is they should have a schematic and play calling upgrade over having Tommy Rees on staff. I'm going to be interested to see what this offense looks like, of course, with Jalen Milroe. And it might look more like early Indiana with Penix when he was fully healthy and ran the ball a bit more. Their defense was pretty good last season, but outside the top 10, again, I really do think that they have a really good opportunity here with Kane Womack to improve where they were defensively. They were number 1 at special teams. That's a really good one for them to potentially carry forward into this year. They're returning a decent amount on the offensive side of the ball. They lose a ton on defense, and this is probably a bit of a concern for them. Where should we expect to see them coming in the next season when it comes to the defensive side of the ball? I think they have potential questions in the secondary. They graded out at number 8 overall in coaching and development. Now, I don't think there's any argument that it's hard to top Nick Saban. But DeBoer himself and his Washington squad did a pretty good job, and at Fresno State in coaching and development. I think that they should be largely fine here. And then Nick Saban, absolutely. I mean, his other superpower, the one that people really focused on, was recruiting. But I think a lot of those people, like a lot of people that cover college football, don't actually have to hire people for a living. Their job is not the hiring side, and is yes, like he was an excellent recruiter, understood the importance of recruiting for sure. Offensively last season, they were really good at explosive drives. The drive efficiency number definitely could be significantly better. They were relying on explosive drives. They were less good at being able to sustain drives, put together long drives to put up points. Their play efficiency was good. This is the least important of the core 4 beta rank metrics. If we're looking at this radar chart with the blue right now for the offense, their play efficiency offensively was really good. Their negative drives, again, like all 4 of these, you could see improvement on. The biggest that would actually drive their offensive numbers significantly up is drive efficiency, explosive drives, and negative drives. Better running the ball than they were passing the ball. That's not a huge surprise. I expect the passing to improve under DeBoer. Defensively, pretty good year overall last year. They were good at finding ways in drive efficiency to find a way to get off the field, avoid giving up big plays. On explosive drives, they did a really good job avoiding giving up big plays altogether. Play efficiency, again, this is an excellent number. Negative drives, all of these, again, to get back to where they want to be, that they'd likely want to improve on. They were much better defending the pass than they were against the run last year. That's something to keep an eye on. The strength of this defense was the pass defense, and I do think that they potentially have some questions coming into this season. We're projecting them at 7.79 wins minus the FCS game, so pop that up to basically 9 wins in our expected win total. As you run through this schedule, of course, you have Georgia at home. That's probably the one that stands out the most. I don't expect Wisconsin under Luke Fickell to provide a massive challenge. We project them to be a pretty significant favorite here. I think Wisconsin's going to beat this projection, so maybe this is closer to 10 points as we get through it. As you run back through the rest of the schedule, though, it is somewhat forgiving, but there are some games towards the end where it really loads up for them. Tennessee, I think, could beat their projection, particularly offensively, if they're able to get the offense going. Missouri, I think, projects to be really good if their defense can hold up with Blake Baker moving on to LSU. LSU, of course, projects to be really good, but there's a ton of questions about this LSU squad that we're going to get to. I like Oklahoma. This is the year the Oklahoma defense needs to step up. Bill Bedenbaugh is your new play caller there. We're going to cover that. And Auburn, all of these teams project to be pretty good, but also have a ton of questions around them too. The tough thing, of course, if you're Alabama, is like some of these games might be closer to toss-ups this year. It'll be interesting to see if they can come out of that stretch, 3-1. You're probably still talking about a playoff team. On to Arkansas. Oh, I need to hit my timer reset. Shoot. All right. The Hogs. Sam Pittman's your head coach. We project them at 48, which is not terribly good. Bobby Petrino, believe it or not, and if you're watching this, you probably already know this. He's back at Arkansas. You can come home, I guess. I mean, he went back to Louisville, so they'll forgive you for sure. Travis Williams is your defensive coordinator here. KJ Jackson is your I should say Jalen Milroe is your quarterback last year for Alabama, 65.8% completion, 10.0 per. Anyway, Travis Williams is your defensive coordinator. Likely quarterback there's a quarterback battle currently. KJ Jackson, Jacoby Criswell, Malachi Singleton, and Talon Green are all competing for the starting job right now. Arkansas, we're projecting them at 48. They were at 67 in 23 and 27 in 22. So they are regressing a little bit. And we're projecting them to improve a little bit from where they were last year, but not get all the way back into the top 30. Offensively, they really struggled last season at 96 overall. That's a really, really bad Power 5, now Power 4 offense. Defensively at 58, that's not great either. That's also really bad, but at least you're sort of within the margin of like what we would consider a Power 4 team. Special teams are really good, so you can carry that forward. That's a positive, like a small thing to potentially hang your hat on. Offensively, they return a decent amount of production and an all right amount on defense as well. Nothing overwhelming there. They rated 63 overall in coaching and development because at 21 in recruiting, they should just be a lot better than they've been. This is a team that has significant problems from a schematic and motivating coaching up development perspective. They have a lot of problems that start primarily with the coaching staff. They've recruited well enough to be just better than this. Offensively, and again, we're moving up to the radar charts here. Offensively, they were okay at drive efficiency here. They were a little less good at explosive drives. They're going to need to find a way, and I do expect Bobby Petrino to help improve things, to find ways to put up big plays. He did improve the Texas A&M offense last season when he took over. Again, pretty good at play efficiency, not all that important. Really bad at letting the defense force 3-and-outs, force turnovers on them, negative drives. That was terrible. They were really bad at effective rush, really bad at effective pass. My expectation is Petrino is going to help them throw the ball a bit more. Certainly a reason that their quarterback potentially moved on and went to Central Florida, looking for a more run-friendly offense for his talents. I do expect them to, like I said, I do expect them to improve offensively off of 96. The question is sort of like by how much. If Petrino can get them into the top 40, top 30, that's a massive improvement. It would give them a shot with defensive improvement to maybe get back into that top 30 range overall. Defensively, they were decent last year. Now we're looking at the red radar chart. Again, like relatively speaking, their drive efficiency was pretty good. Now they did give up too many big plays, too many explosive drives. Their play efficiency was good. Now they were pretty good at forcing 3-and-outs, forcing turnovers. Their negatives drives number was pretty solid. Just gave up way too many big plays last season. They struggled against the run. That's a real problem. They're going to need to improve that. An effective pass, like they struggled as well. That's another one that they're going to have to, overall, this team just needs significant improvement off of where they finished last season. The schedule it's interesting. It's interesting. So this is they get Oklahoma State early. We have this as a toss up. I think this is a really interesting game. My expectation is Oklahoma State's probably going to be a favorite among fans in this game and among commentators. Oklahoma State was pretty lucky last season with turnover luck in the games that some of the games that they won. Much better in the win total than they were in the advanced stats. We have them projected lower than a lot of people coming into this year. If you're just looking at win totals and maybe like quarterback and coach returning, this should be an interesting game. I really give Arkansas a really good shot to win this one. Auburn, they get Auburn early. Auburn, I feel like, is a team that could potentially surprise some people, not in the sense of like being really, really good, but can be good enough to ruin somebody's day. They do project to be better than this Arkansas squad. I do think this is probably closer to, say, 10 points by the time it rolls around. A&M is a team that I think has a shot to be really good under Mike Elko. They have a decent amount of talent. They may not have the depth that's required. We're obviously going to cover that. But this is this is the tough part of their schedule here for sure. You're going to get LSU. You have a really good shot against the Mississippi State squad that I think is going to be in the midst of a bit of a rebuild after kind of running face first into a wall under Zach Arnett last season. Ole Miss is a team that a lot of people like coming into this year. Arkansas does get them at home. If they're going to need to find a way to slow down the run. I think in particular because Lane Kiffin's attack, since he hired Jeff Lebby actually. And it's now with Charlie Weiss Jr., is a bit more run-oriented. And then they finish, of course, with Missouri. That's a tough game. This Missouri team does project to be pretty good. All right. Auburn. Oh, wait. I really need to get that button somewhere else when I do this again. So the Auburn Tigers, Hugh Freeze, of course, is your head coach here. Derek Nix is your new offensive coordinator for the Auburn Tigers. Hugh Freeze is your play caller, though. DJ Durkin, that DJ Durkin is your defensive coordinator. Just tremendous job. Just continually failing up by that guy. I can't believe people let him coach. Anyway, Peyton Thorne is your quarterback, 61.1% completion percentage, 6.6 per. Those definitely need to improve. Modern college football, 65% completion percentage is really what you're aiming for or better. And 6.6 per attempt is not going to get the job done. They were number 35 and 23 and number 37 and 22. We are projecting them to improve here. Offensively, they really struggled last year. It's something I think that they still feel, and if you talk to, and you'll hear in our conversation upcoming with Josh Pate, they still feel they're a little bit further away on offense than maybe they'd like to be, and they have some holes to fill with recruiting and development. But I do expect the offense to improve. I think Hugh Freeze can coach offense, pretty well. They should likely, their offense, I think, should start to pick up. Defensively, I think is a really interesting one. Durkin's not really that great of a defensive coordinator. He has struggled to put outside of one good season in Michigan. I'm not sure he's ever put up a top 10 defense over an entire season in beta rank. Special teams, again, we seem to be running through as we do this alphabetically, a lot of SEC teams that are really good at special teams. They are returning a lot on offense. That's part of why they're projected to make this jump, is that this offense really should improve with this much coming back. Now, whether they're able to take like a massive step forward, I think is a big question. I think they have a shot if they are able to get to, say, in the 20s offensively. I think this team has a shot to hit somewhere around this, 14 projection. I don't think that they have much upside beyond this 14 projection. This is probably I would say the high end for them. But some of it is based on the fact that, as well as, in addition to the tremendous amount of returning offensive production, that you have a 2-year recruiting grade that's sitting at 9. I mean, they do recruit pretty well. I don't think that they have the depth that they'd quite like there, but I don't think that there are still a lot of teams in college football that would absolutely trade roster problems with Auburn. 75 overall coaching and development. That's a watch out. They haven't done a great job developing players and putting together a better product on the field than what you see. Last year, offensively, we're going to move up to the blue radar chart. Their drive efficiency was all right. This is definitely something they're going to need to improve on. I do expect them under Freeze to get better at putting up explosive drives. That would certainly help a lot. But one of the main problems was on negative drives. Too many 3 and outs, too many turnovers. They were a lot better running the ball than they were throwing the ball. Significantly better in effective rush than in effective pass. Defensively, they did a decent job with drive efficiency, finding ways to get off the field and avoid giving up long drives. But you could, and they did a really good job with explosive plays, explosive drives, and negative drives. The one thing that they could really improve on is giving up fewer long drives relative to their others, relative to their other skills. They were decent in effective pass, less good in effective rush. They're going to need to improve the run defense, I think, in particular for them. We're projecting them at 7 wins plus the FCS game, so 8 wins. It is it's an interesting schedule. I mean, they're going to start out with Cal and New Mexico. Those are, Cal is a team that Auburn should be able to beat at home. And I think Cal's interesting. I wouldn't say they're great, but this Auburn run defense is going to get a test in that Cal game for sure. New Mexico is a team that they should absolutely whomp. Look, Arkansas, we just talked about them. I think they have a chance to beat this projection that we have for them, but it's tough. Oklahoma is going to be a tough matchup for them, but it does project to be a tight game. If it does end up being an actual tight game, it might be a sign early on that Oklahoma is not going to live up to what we expect from them. A rivalry game against Georgia, but Georgia should run away with this one pretty handily. We have them projected as a pretty significant favorite. Missouri, I think Missouri, again, this is the high end of the projection for Auburn. I think this is probably closer to 5 or 6 for Missouri. This Kentucky game, if Auburn doesn't quite live up to their expectations, Kentucky's not great, but they're not bad, and they've been kind of consistently in this range, so I don't expect Kentucky to fall much below where we have them here. This should be a tight game. It might be one of those games that helps determine how people feel about this Auburn season. A loss to Kentucky, people might not be feeling great, because as you headed to the very end of it, you do get the nice break against Louisiana Monroe. But you get a Texas A&M team that we've talked about that is suddenly coached by somebody that might actually focus on football. And then you get Alabama, of course. Now, look, Auburn had Alabama on the ropes last year. It's always a tight game with the rivalry game, everything like that. I get that. It just feels like it still might be like a little bit of catch up for Auburn to get there. I do think Hugh Freeze has an opportunity to potentially get them there. All right, Florida under Billy Napier. We have Florida projected at 21 overall. Billy Napier is likely is still your play caller. Rob Sale is your OC. Austin Armstrong's your defensive coordinator. Graham Mertz is back. He was better than you might remember last season. 72.9% completion percentage, 8.1 per. Offensively, they struggled, though. They were at 33 overall on offense last season. That's a kind of a middle-of-the-road Power 5, Power 4 offense. They profoundly struggled defensively, though, last year. They at 77 or overall. They were just a really bad defense. 32 on special teams. That could certainly improve. It definitely wouldn't hurt them. And as we've run through the teams before this, there were quite a few teams that were pretty good at special teams. They have a decent, like, and part of this projection is we have a decent amount of returning production here on offense, 28%. And returning production is more correlated with offensive output than on defense. Recruiting is a little more correlated with how defenses perform. 85 overall in coaching and development. They haven't done a great job developing players, getting them ready to play, and coaching them up on the field and X's and O's. So this is something they're absolutely going to have to improve. It feels like a make or break season for Billy Napier, which feels about right. I mean, this Florida job is still, I think, a really, really good job. The SEC is tough, absolutely, and it's gotten tougher. But when you're able to, their 2-year rolling recruiting ranking is at number 5 overall. They should just certainly be better than they've been. Offensively, they struggled with drive efficiency, being able to sustain drives to put up points. They were a little more dependent on explosive drives here. Negative drives, they gave up too many 3-and-outs, too many turnovers. Really need to cut down on that coming into this year. Effective rush and effective pass, neither was particularly good. They didn't excel at either. They're going to need to do better at both. Now, the Billy Napier, when things are really rolling for him offensively, like they do tend to run the ball pretty well. They're going to need to figure out the run game again for sure in order to get things going. Defensively, they were pretty good at limiting long drives. They made up for that by giving up a lot of big plays. Their explosive drives number, they really struggled with that last season. They also could stand to improve at forcing 3-and-outs and forcing turnovers. They were better against the pass than they were against the run. That's certainly something to keep an eye on as we come in the next season. We have Florida they were at 47 and 23. They were at 14 and 22. So we are projecting them to improve off of where they were last year. Again, like most of that is coming off of a decent amount of returning production on offense and their overall recruiting ranking. If you add in the FCS game, we've got them projected right at 6 wins and bowl eligibility. That's probably going to get Billy Napier fired. We've got this game against Miami as a toss-up. I feel like that's pretty fair. Miami's probably gone more in on the transfer portal than just about anybody outside of Ohio State and Oregon coming into this year. I mean, really kind of pushing their chips in towards the middle. I think there are some pretty big expectations in Coral Gables. But this could be a potentially tight game if Florida's able to live up to these expectations. Texas A&M. They get them at home. This should be an interesting matchup, I think, for both teams to get a real feel for where they are. Not that we will get a decent idea against Miami for Florida. But A&M, I think, is going to be a really good matchup for them as Mike Elko, I think, tries to really get things going. I would still have Elko and Texas A&M favored in this game. Mississippi State, this is a game they should absolutely win. And then we get a game against UCF that is at home. This could potentially be a tough game. this is where you start to talk about, like, could Billy Napier get fired in season if they lost at home to UCF? I think that's a real possibility. This UCF squad, I think, has legitimate belief in themselves. They could go in and make this game tight. And we've got it projected at about 5 points. I think it might be closer to 3 around kickoff. If they haven't really made significant strides, and we'll see that early in the season, this could be closer to a toss-up. Tennessee, again, this is it depends on, where the quarterback is, for Tennessee, and if they're able to get the offense going again. But this could be a tough game. And again, like, there's a really tough stretch down the backstretch that I think it's just going to make hard for Florida, unless they can not just live up. I mean, we have them projected at 21 overall, and we've got them projected just at 6 wins and just at 3 conference wins. I mean, that's probably still going to get Billy Napier fired. They're going to have to beat those. And that's even before you get to the last game against Florida State. So it's a tough schedule going from, Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and then Florida State. That's a really rough schedule. But you could genuinely see Billy Napier out at the UCF game. Whoops. Here I am, just popping buttons randomly. There we go. Georgia. We already did a preview video for Georgia. You can find that on the site if you want. As we make it onto this, at least we're not even halfway through. Whew, I told you, it's like the director's cut. So Kirby Smart's your head coach. Mike Bobo's your offensive coordinator here. Glenn Schumann's your DC. Carson Beck's your quarterback. 72.4% completion percentage, 9.5 per. For my money, outside of Jaden Daniels, the best, probably the best quarterback in college football last year. Did just a fantastic job. I know there's some Washington fans that are going to hear that and scream Michael Penix and all of that, and that's fine. I watched a lot of those games in the back half of that season on the Pac-12. So Georgia, we're predicting them at number 1 overall. They were at number 2 in 23, number 1 in 22. Offensively last year, they were at number 3. They were at number 1 overall, and they put up massive offensive numbers in 22. Last year, they did take a little bit of a step back. I called that that would happen with Mike Bobo as your play caller. That is likely going to continue into this season. Defensively, this is not a vintage Georgia defense that we've seen under Kirby Smart. They were at number 10 overall last season. In their championship years, like they had a phenomenal, one of the best defenses we've ever measured in 21. In 22, they came back a little bit, but we're still a top 2, top 3 defense. Special teams were at number 6 overall. Again, like, having good special teams matters. Offensively, they do return a good bit of production. That's part of why we project them at number 1 overall. I think that we should have a lot of faith that offensively they're going to be able to put it together, even without Brock Bowers. And I mean, I think that there's, some concern who's going to be catching the ball, but this Georgia team, I do expect to still be consistently really good with Beck back there. They're returning not a ton on the defensive side of the ball. That's probably where I think the questions lie. Georgia's not likely to get to the 21, 22 juggernaut type teams that were so good and could go out and really just lay the wood to people. This is going to be a team that's really, really good, but will probably have a few warts, much like last year's team. They're at number 3 overall in coaching and development. They do a really good job translating their recruiting, recruiting of players into great players to play on the field that have great coaching to go with it. Number 3 overall in the 2-year rolling recruiting ranking. That makes a ton of sense. Kirby Smart came from the Nick Saban school of recruiting is important, and you're sitting in Georgia. That's a great recruiting place to be. Offensively, they were very good at drive efficiency last season. It's something they could certainly improve on coming into this year. One of the things that the very best offenses do is be able to sustain drives to put up points. They were really explosive, though. I mean, I think the only team that was more explosive than Georgia last year was LSU. Their play efficiency was quite good. One of their best numbers, though, is negative drives, avoiding 3 and outs, avoiding turnovers. That's a really good call. I'm interested to see if they pick up the run a bit more coming into this year, with Brock Bowers having moved on. of course, with Beck there, you may not need to, but they have they threw the ball really, really well last year. I do expect that to continue. Defensively, they could improve both their drive efficiency and explosive drives numbers. Avoiding giving up, more big plays, I think would certainly help them. They were pretty good on negative drives. Again, like these are all numbers that I think for them to get back into the top 5 that they're going to need to improve on. They were a little bit better against the pass than they were against the run. You did get to see some of that when they went up against Alabama. That was a pretty bad matchup for them overall. And I do think, Nick Saban has definitely been able to scheme Kirby pretty well when they had played. We're projecting them with the SCS game at almost 12 wins, 11 and a half wins. We're basically predicting them to go undefeated. It's going to open up with Clemson on a neutral field. We have Georgia as a really significant favorite there. I actually think that's fair. Clemson's got a ton of talent. They've been a bit of a head case with it's less about the transfers for me than it is the coordinators for Clemson, particularly in the offensive side of the ball where they just haven't been able to get it together. Then they have an early date with Alabama that jumps out to you. That one's going to be interesting to see. We've got them as a pretty heavy favorite in that game. They're going to get a Kalen DeBoer coach team that's going to be very different, of course, than what we've seen. I think we're going to find out a lot more about Alabama and what they are than maybe Georgia, unless they completely faceplant in that game. I do expect them to be a significant favorite against Auburn. Mississippi State, they should be able to run through that. The one that people probably have more circled, I think, because Texas was in the playoff last year as well, and brings Quinn Ewers back and has the coaching staff stability is Texas there. Now we have them projected at number 8. We have Georgia as a significant favorite here on the road. I think this is probably closer to a touchdown by the time we get to this game. Texas is going to need to take a step forward offensively that we just haven't seen Ewers able to make up to this point. Then they get a Florida team. We expect them to be a significant favorite here. Ole Miss, I don't think I'm not as high on as some other folks. I mean, when we talk to Josh Pate, he's pretty high on Ole Miss, relatively speaking. Kirby has absolutely had Josh Heupel's number even when he's had the offense really going. So I do expect them to be able to handle Tennessee, and then Massachusetts and Georgia Tech, I think, are pretty much a foregone conclusion. All right. Next, Kentucky. Mark Stoops is your head coach. We have them projected at 27 overall. Bush Hamdan. And now this is Bush Hamdan was the offensive coordinator at Washington under it was under Chris Peterson. That's right. And then when Jimmy Lake took over, he was let go. And I got to say, because then they went on to, the guy that was just terrible, and they did the run the damn ball thing. And yeah. Anyway, Bush Hamdan went and was then the offensive coordinator at Boise State. Did a pretty good job there. He now comes in to take over for Liam Cohen, who was great in his one season in his first go round at Kentucky and just was unable to recapture the magic coming back. Hamdan, I think, has improved as a play caller. He was pretty good at Boise State. I'm interested to see him take over this offense. Brad White's your defensive coordinator. They've been heading a little bit in the wrong direction defensively. This is Mark Stoops' side of the ball. I'm interested to see how much input he has on this side of the ball. They're going to need to turn that side of the ball around in particular coming into this year. Because they were at 47 overall last year, 36 offensively. These are decent numbers, but not great. They struggled a bit on special teams last year. That's something to keep an eye on. They'll definitely need to improve that. They returned a decent amount of production on the offensive side of the ball. But defensively, this really does need, with this amount of returning production and a not bad recruiting ranking, they really need to turn around the defense this year. Sitting at 47 overall, that's a pretty bad Power 4 defense. That's not going to get you very far in the SEC. And you don't have the SEC East type schedule anymore to fall back on and, hope things turn out. Now they sit at a decent level in coaching development relative to their recruiting. The last couple of years have not been great. They were at 38 in 23 and 31 in 22. It feels like we're getting a little bit further away from the best of the Mark Stoops years. He's going to need to inject some momentum, get something going. I think this year in particular, I don't think he's in trouble yet in Lexington, but they're going to need to be better than they've been. Now, offensively, Brock Vandagriff is your likely quarterback, 66.7 completion percentage, 9.2 per. Now, they need to improve their drive efficiency on offense, being able to sustain long drives to put up points. It wouldn't hurt at all to be more explosive. Their negative drives number, though, stands out. They need to give up fewer 3-and-outs, fewer turnovers. They were better throwing the ball than running the ball coming into last year. And they're going to need to improve probably in both. With Hamdan, he threw the ball around at Boise State. I do expect them to throw it around a little bit more. Defensively, they struggled with drive efficiency considerably. They were a little bit better at containing big plays, but they need to find ways to use the field to their advantage and not give up long drives. Their play efficiency was pretty good. Their negative drives was really good. Their real Achilles heel last year was, teams could just drive on them. And it tells you right here, this effective rush number, you could run on Kentucky last year. That's something you could pass on Kentucky last year. Now their effective rush wasn't great. They were better defending the run than they were defending the pass, but they're going to have to clean up their pass defense. Sorry, I read that. I misread my own graphic. They're going to need to clean up their pass defense coming into this season. Something absolutely to keep an eye on. They do have so much coming back. And I will say the secondary in particular, those guys can improve. We've seen that with, teams over the years. If they're able to start guys, they might get burned in their first year and then, they learn in their second. We've got them projected just at 6 wins. When you count in the FCS game, they start out with a pretty manageable schedule. That South Carolina game jumps out to me. This is another team that's sort of like fighting for what used to be like a middle class SEC lifestyle, like with Texas and Oklahoma now added in, might be it might be a little harder for a team that was kind of, making a living in the SEC East, to put up some wins, in any given year. Might be a little harder without that schedule to fall back on and with some, harder games on the schedule. They're going to get Georgia after that. I do feel like that South Carolina game is a game that they both South Carolina and Kentucky really need to win. Then they get Ohio. This is, Ohio, of course, is a marginal game. I don't expect them, unless they get really lucky or Georgia just face plants to hang around much in that game. Another game that's really interesting is the Mississippi game here. We don't have this game as like this is on the road. We don't have Mississippi as a huge favorite here, 4 points. This might be, depending on if Mississippi beats their expectations, this could be as high as a touchdown, but I don't think it's going to get beyond one possession. Significant favorite at Vanderbilt. So you're not it's only really kind of in the back part of the schedule that things get interesting. Like I said, that's probably like the top end projection for Auburn. Florida could be, minus a coach at that point. These are two critical games for Kentucky that they probably need to win. Tennessee's a game that if they don't get things going offensively, that they could definitely win. Texas is a real tough outing, for them. I think Texas is certainly competent enough to put them away. And Louisville's been fantastic defensively. I expect that they're going to be able to get their offense going a little bit more. That should be a tight game. As I look for where I put things. All right. LSU. Brian Kelly's your head coach. We've got him projected at number 4. You may think that's freaking crazy after last season, and I accept that. They were pretty good last year. It was all offense all the time. They were the number 1 offense last season. Mike Denbrock, and I had to eat some crow here. I didn't think he'd ever put up offensive numbers like he did last year as the OC there and with Jaden Daniels, and it just really clicked. Just a phenomenal offense last season. And Daniels was not just a ton of their passing, and in something that, we used to say quarterbacks couldn't really improve their accuracy, Daniels was able to improve his accuracy over time. But he was also a tremendous amount of their rushing last season as well. It's going to be a lot for them to replace. Joe Sloan is your new play caller there. He was promoted internally on the staff. Anytime you have a brand spanking new play caller who's not called players before, mileage may vary. Now, they did get Blake Baker as your new defensive coordinator. They got him from Missouri. I thought that was a heck of a get. He's done a very good job in Missouri and was pretty good at Miami before that. He's got a tall job ahead of him, though. Garrett Nussmeier is your likely quarterback, 61.5% completion percentage, 7.6 per. They were at number 5 last season, even with the massive defensive struggles. That's how good they were offensively. Number 6 and 22. The defensive struggles were quite real. They were a very, very bad defense last season. That's why they have a new defensive coordinator in place. Of course, Mike Denbrock went back to Notre Dame, of all places. Special teams, of course, were really good. They returned a decent amount, not great on the offensive side of the football. We are projecting with they have a ton of talent still on the defensive side of the ball. They're bringing a lot of guys back. I mean, they certainly have some questions, but we are expecting a really significant bounce back for them defensively. I think the real question is how big is the regression on offense? They're number 17 overall at coaching and development. They've done a pretty good job developing players, scheming it up, getting good results on the field, for what they bring in. And 11 overall in recruiting. I think that this is one to watch out for. They've not recruited as well under Kelly as you would have expected, and especially after all the talk of why Kelly made the move to LSU. Some of that may be NIL related issues and not really being able to marshal their resources in the right direction. Last season, they could still improve potentially on drive efficiency from where they were. They were just massively explosive last year. This was a home run offense last year. Also excellent at play efficiency. That's their yards per play outside of explosive plays. And negative drives. They did a fantastic job avoiding 3 and outs, avoiding turnovers. They were excellent throwing the ball. They had a good stable of receivers, and Daniels, of course, he was just a one-man wrecking ball, fully deserved the Heisman last year. I'm interested to see what this offense looks like. It should be like, I'm not sure watching a lot of LSU tape from last year is going to help you a lot on understanding schematically what's coming. It may help you preview some players that may be carrying over on what they're good at, but beyond that, defensively, they really struggled. They were decent-ish at drive efficiency, finding ways to get off the field and avoid giving up points. But they struggled at defending explosive drives. They definitely need to force more 3 and outs. You could absolutely throw on them all day. They really struggled to defend the pass last year. They were a bit better defending the run, but they have to get a lot better at both. Blake Baker, there's a ton of talent. I mean, there's no, does LSU have a roster problem? A perfect roster? No. Would, tons of, 90% of the teams in college football flip rosters with LSU? Yes. So Baker should be able to, I think, turn things around fairly quickly. We've got them projected at almost 10 wins when you count in the FCS game. The thing here is we probably have USC under projected. Danton Lynn is coming in as the new defensive coordinator, but we're also talking about them, a USC team that struggled offensively, was very bad defensively, and lost the number 1 overall pick. They had significant problems with this roster. I think LSU should be a pretty sizable favorite in this game. Maybe it's only 7 points, but I think it probably should be closer to 10. I think USC beats this projection we have for them at 40 here, but I'm not sure that USC on its own is a top 10 team or anything. This should be a game that LSU wins. I think they've got then I think the schedule gets interesting, where they have a chance to rack up some wins. They should be better than South Carolina. They should be better than UCLA, a team that I think has a lot of question marks coming into this season. South Alabama without Kane Womack, I think, is an interesting proposition. I do like Major Applewhite, but I don't think that there is quite as much of a potential stumble, they're less of a potential danger that you overlook them and you trip without Kane Womack there on staff. Mississippi, this is a game I think to really keep an eye on for them. It's the kind of game that I think could help determine how the season goes. I like LSU's chances in this game we've got them projected as about a 7-point favorite. This might be closer to 3 if Mississippi beats their projection and LSU comes back a little bit from theirs. This Texas A&M game is another one, as well as Alabama. These are the kind of games that if LSU were to win, and go 2-1 through this stretch, I think they have a shot to potentially, make it to the playoff this year under Kelly. Because you don't have to play Georgia potentially until the SEC championship game. Oklahoma, they are going to have to take the big step forward, like we said, defensively. But LSU, this should be like, if they are able through the backstretch to only drop 2 games, I think you have the potential to be talking about a playoff team. All right, on to, we're like only not even quite halfway. So, Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin's your head coach. Charlie Weis Jr. is your offensive coordinator. Pete Golding, former DC at Alabama, is your defensive coordinator. Jackson Dart, of course, is the QB, 65.1% completion, 9.4 per. They were at 21 and 23 and 22 and 20. Yeah, 22 and 22. We've got them projected at 18 overall. And I think there are a lot of people that are a lot higher on them than this and talking about them as a dark horse for, potentially contending for the SEC title. This offense last year was at 21 overall. And I know that they did put up some big plays. It is a bit more of a running offense than a passing offense traditionally under them, but they did lean into Dart a little bit more last season. They are gonna need to pick up offensively, I think, if they're gonna beat this projection from where they were. I know that, and we talked to Josh Pate, they really like a running back that they have here. I think they could potentially run the ball pretty well. They did pretty well in the portal with defensive linemen. I think they do have the potential to improve this defensive number. Pete Golding, I think, gets a lot of flack for his time at Alabama. He didn't put up bad defenses at Alabama. They just didn't put up the kind of numbers that they had put with when Jeremy Pruitt was there or something like that. They were number 19 overall at special teams. They're going to need to improve that. I mean, last year, Ole Miss was a good team, but they didn't really stand out on anything in particular. Their defense was kind of middle of the Power 4. They return a ton on the offensive side of the ball. That's part of why I think there's so much optimism coming into this season. And they should be able to, put an offense together that threatens to get into the top 10. Defensive side of the ball, they're returning quite a bit less. That's less important, of course. Defense is more correlated with recruiting. Coaching and development, 43 overall. They haven't, I think that there's a perception. Lane Kiffin has done a good job winning games in the SEC. I don't know yet that he has put together a team that has really outperformed their recruiting. So that coaching and development number you see there reflects that. They sit at 20 overall in their rolling 2-year recruiting ranking. Offensively last season, they were decent at drive efficiency. They were better at explosive drives, putting up big plays. Their play efficiency number was pretty good overall. They definitely had too many 3-and-outs, too many turnovers. That's something to keep an eye on. Traditionally with Kiffin, they have run the ball a little bit more. He does run a version of that Briles offense going back to when he had Jeff Lebby as his offensive coordinator at his prior job. And even here, Charlie Weis Jr., run something fairly similar. They did lean a little bit more into Dart last season. I do expect them to run the ball a little bit more coming into this year. Defensively, they were decent-ish at drive efficiency. They definitely need to, but that's something that they're going to have to improve. They need to give up fewer explosive drives. They need to limit the big plays. They were decent at play efficiency. Their negative drives number was pretty solid. Again, still something they improved. They're going to need to be better defending the run and defending the pass coming into this season. The pressure, I think, should be on Golding. Not that because they have so much coming back or something like that, but because they did spend so significantly in the portal. And he, was a hire that I do think is a potential upgrade if he can really get it going. We've got them projected at about 8 wins when you count in the FCS game. And they've got a very forgiving start. They don't have a game that we would consider a challenge until, Kentucky. This is, but this stretch here with Kentucky and South Carolina, these are games that if Ole Miss is going to reach their projection, they cannot drop a game up until when they hit LSU, and then the schedule starts to stiffen up a little bit. The schedule's still largely favorable. I think LSU is potentially over projected. I think a lot of it has to do with, how well they have done, minus what they were defensively last year. And again, like this Oklahoma team also has a ton of questions. These games are probably closer to toss-ups, I think. Then you get Georgia. That game is probably not a toss-up. Georgia might need to turn the ball over 2 times for Ole Miss to really hang in that one. But Florida is not overwhelming at all. And then you get Mississippi State. This is a real shot for them. It is quite likely that they come out of this regular season with only 2 losses. A 2-loss SEC team. And look, I mean, part of this is a function of the schedule. As we get into these very, very large conferences, schedule is going to matter a ton, and who your misses are every year. This is a good set of misses for Ole Miss. If they can come out of the back half of the schedule here and only have 2 losses, this is probably a playoff team. All right, we did it. We're halfway through. Unbelievable. All right. Mississippi State. Jeff Lebby is your new head coach. Jeff Lebby is also, refreshingly, he is your offensive coordinator and play caller. He is listed in the directory as also they don't have an offensive coordinator in title. And with Lebby calling plays, he is it. Coleman Hutzler is your defensive coordinator here. Look, we've got them projected at 54 overall. That's not terribly good. I mean, they could potentially improve on this, particularly with Lebby, coaching the offense. He should be a significant improvement over where they were last season, because where they were last season was awful on offense. 115 overall in beta rank. They were decent defensively at number 34 overall. I do expect that the defense, I do expect that the offense is going to take a significant stride forward. On special teams, they were awful last year. That's something they're going to have to improve on at 122 overall. They're not returning a ton of production on either side of the ball. 99 on offense, 125 on defense. Those aren't great numbers. Not a lot to hang your hat on here. This is a team that in particular, I think in wins and losses could look like they're treading water. They're at 49 overall at coaching and development, and it is hard to recruit in Starkville at number 42 overall there. Last year, offensively, they just profoundly struggled to stay in drives, to put up points. They didn't put up a ton of explosive plays. They're slightly better at play efficiency, but they gave up too many 3 and outs, too many turnovers. They didn't run the ball well. They threw the ball even worse. Defensively, this is an interesting setup here. I think they were, like I said, they were decent defensively last year. They did an okay job finding ways to get off the field and avoid giving up points. They could certainly improve there, though, too, and improving on explosive drives. Negative drives is another one. They did a pretty good job, I think, under Arnett, actually, finding ways to force 3 and outs, force turnovers. They were about equal in defending the pass as they were as defending the run. If the defense can hold serve and the offense can, I think, get the kind of improvement you would expect when you hire an offensive head coach like Jeff Lebby, I think that this team could surprise. I don't know by how much, but I think for them getting into the 40s this year in advanced stats would be a really big thing. The schedule is hard, but there's some definite room for bright side here. They should be favored over Arizona State, even though this game is away. Arizona State's still a full-on project, but that's a game that if they lose, things could, that one could really hurt. Toledo is definitely a game that they should win. Florida, if they were to knock off Florida, that's probably maybe Billy Neighbor would get fired before UCF. Then the schedule stiffens up quite a bit. Texas, they're going to be a significant underdog for. Georgia, they're going to be a massive underdog for. A&M's a game that they're going to, I think if you're a Mississippi State fan, what you're looking for here is you're looking to see progress, right? That's what you need to be looking for. You need to be looking to see if this team is actually, taking a step forward, because they finished at 80 overall in 23, 18 and 22. I forgot to mention that Blake Shapen, the Baylor transfer, is your starting quarterback in all likelihood. 61.7% completion percentage, 7.3 per. You want to see progress here, and you want to see it on the offensive side of the football. Texas was and has been under Kwiatkowski better, really good defensively. Georgia's been really good defensively. I expect with Mike Elko there, I'm not saying that they should be able to go in and just put up a ton of points, but you want to see signs of progress, that things schematically you're starting to put it together, even in these really tough games here. Then it lightens up a little bit. Like Arkansas is a shot, a chance for them to take on a team that I do think also has some issues. That's a game that I think both of these teams are going to have circled on their schedule as a chance to feel good about themselves towards the end of the season. Massachusetts, of course, is a win. Then it toughens back up again. Tennessee is going to be a tough matchup for them. Missouri is a really tough matchup. And then you get Ole Miss in the Egg Bowl. And again, that's another really tough matchup. I mean, we've got them projected here as only winning about one game within the SEC, maybe hitting 4.5 wins overall. I think the schedule for these guys is really going to turn on, being able to win the games that you expect. That is Arizona State, Toledo, Massachusetts, the FCS game. If you do that, if they're able to do that, bowl eligibility gets if you squint, you could find, and you took down Arkansas, another team that's sort of a little bit questionable and needs to improve coming into the season. If you could find a way to win another game, you could get to bowl eligibility, but I think it's probably about 5 wins would be a really good year for this squad. Missouri. Now, this is a team that we're higher on than Ole Miss. Eli Drinkwitz, of course, is your head coach here. Kirby Moore is your offensive coordinator. Corey Batoon's your new DC, replacing Blake Baker here. Brady Cook is your quarterback, 66.1% completion percentage, 9.0 per. They finished at 13-23. They were really good last year. 29 overall and 22. We've got them projected at 12, so right about where they finished last year. They were at 16 overall offensively last year. Of course, Luther Burden is your wide receiver there. He, along with Tetairoa McMillan in Arizona, probably toss up for your best wide receivers in college football coming into this season. Defensively, they were also really good, number 14 overall. And I think the question might be is what did they lose when they lost Baker? It's something we talk about, with Josh Pate, in the interview portion of this. But what did they lose when they lose Baker? Is the defense going to be able to hold serve? They were pretty good on special teams as well. They've got a ton of returning production on offense. That's part of why their projection is where it is coming into this season. They sit at number 63 on returning production on the defensive side of the ball. That's probably where my biggest concerns are for this Missouri team. I think they could pop into the top 10 offensively. I think the question is because can they stay in the top 20 defensively? Now they're at 35 in coaching and development. They do a decent job developing the talent, and putting together the X's and O's for what they get. Their 2-year rolling recruiting average is at 27 overall. Now last season, this was not a terribly efficient offense. They struggled a little bit to put together long drives and put up points, but they were really explosive. And they did avoid 3-and-outs and avoid turnovers. So what they lacked in efficiency, they were able to make up for. But I'd like to see, I think if this team ends up in the top 10, I'd like to see them become more efficient there. They were better throwing the ball than they were running the ball last year. Defensively, really good at drive efficiency. They were able to find ways to avoid giving up long drives to give up points. They definitely gave up a few big plays last year. That's something they could certainly improve on or look to improve on. They did a really good job forcing 3-and-outs, forcing turnovers last year. Not a big run pass split here. They were good against both. I'm interested to see again, and we talked about it a little bit, is where this defense shakes out. We've got them projected at 9 wins ish, almost 10 wins when you count in the FCS game. And the schedule is super forgiving to start out the year for sure. Buffalo, Boston College, Vanderbilt. That is a training camp. that is a glorified scrimmage to start things out. And they're all at home. And then comes a game that's going to tell us an awful lot. And again, I think there's, I think people and maybe people, I think, to Josh Pate's point, people in College Station prefer you keep sleeping on A&M. I'm really interested to see where this A&M squad is here, but this is our likely first real test and to figure out where this Missouri team is going to be. Colin Klein's your new offensive coordinator for A&M. they stay healthy, I don't think they have a ton of depth, but if they stay healthy, and they should be healthy early in the season, this could be a challenge for this Missouri squad. And this could be the type of game that might determine whether they were to sort of make it into a playoff. But like the schedule is still pretty favorable here. Then you get UMass. I do like them to be better than Auburn. I think Auburn, like I said, like we have them projected at about their ceiling, but I don't think Missouri is so good that if they went out and had a really bad game against Auburn, or had a game where they turned the ball over a couple times, that they could just walk away with a win, even though it's at home. This Alabama game here is a game that I feel like could determine. That is the game on their schedule that I think when you go through here is not a team that is a team that the wins and the advanced stats are going to line up a little bit more. I do like this is the game that I think people are going to maybe have a little bit more circled, and that if Missouri were to come into this game with only one loss or 0 losses and come away with a win, I think that's where Missouri gets, is going to get propelled potentially, not just into a playoff, but maybe into that SEC championship game, because the schedule lightens up again in the back half. Oklahoma, like I said, this game is a toss-up right now. I think both of these teams have reasons for to believe that they could, be better. They're certainly better than they were last year. Oklahoma was pretty good last year. And they have a new offensive coordinator in place. They are going to need the defense to finally take a step forward. But after that, the schedule lightens up significantly. Again, South Carolina, Mississippi State, and Arkansas, those should be all wins. Even if they drop, if they go 2-2 against A&M, Auburn, Alabama, and Oklahoma, that's probably going to put them in the playoff, right? Like we're talking about a 2-loss SEC team. They're probably getting in. The schedule, again, like I said, helps them out a bit here. If they're an only 1-loss team out of that set, then, you're definitely talking about a playoff team, unless they just got manhandled in the SEC championship or something like that. Moving on to Oklahoma. So the Sooners are under Brent Venables, of course. Bill Bedenbaugh is your new offensive coordinator. I actually remember Bill Bedenbaugh from last time he was a full-time offensive coordinator calling plays at Arizona. He was very frustrating at finishing drives. I'll say that. So that was about a decade ago. Maybe more than a decade ago. So there's been a bit of time passed. I'm not going to hang too much on, how frustrating they were at finishing drives when Bedenbaugh took over. Anyway, he took over from Sonny Dykes. That was back when Mike Stoops was the head coach at Arizona. We've got Oklahoma projected at number 10 overall. Zach Alley is your defensive coordinator. He's a new one coming in. He's worked with Venables before at Clemson. Jackson Arnold is your quarterback. 63.8 completion percentage, 8.2 per. They were at number, he's replacing Dylan Gabriel, who's now off to Oregon. They finished at number 8 last year overall. This was still a pretty good team last season, even with some of the struggles they had. Number 26 overall and 22, so there was some improvement. We're projecting them to take a little bit of a step back coming into this year. Last year, offensively, they were really good under Lebby, number 6 overall. I think this is, for me, is where the question really arises. Lebby is not a great, not in the, Sarkisian range, if Sark's on his game, offensive coordinator, but he's a very good offensive coordinator. Sitting at number 6 overall is nothing to sniff at. How much does this offense potentially take a step back now with Bedenbaugh taking over is interesting. And I say that I don't mean that as a massive slide against Bedenbaugh. It's just, we might expect a little bit of a comeback on the offensive side. Defensively, this is the one that jumps out to me because at 19 overall, Venables, for my money, was the best defensive coordinator in college football when he was at Clemson. The Oklahoma defense has not really turned it around. With him there, they don't return a ton. If you're kind of peeking down here, they don't return a ton on offense. They're going to have a lot of turnover on the offensive side of the football. Defensively, though, they bring back a lot, and they should have experience in Venables' system. So This is the year that the Oklahoma defense, I think if Oklahoma is going to have a surprise year, and the schedule is pretty stout, but if they're going to have a surprise year that I think, like where they make a surprise playoff run in the SEC this year, and I don't think that that's the expectation that anyone has, it's got to be led by this defense. They have to take a step forward. And I say this, like, given what they're returning and everything, even though, returning production is more correlated with offense, like, this has to be the year that, Oklahoma breaks into the top 10 defensively. And I think the change at DC reflects some of that. They're at 31 overall in coaching and development. They're not knocking this one out of the park. They've kind of struggled under this, with this a little bit of late. They're number 8 overall in your 2-year rolling recruiting ranking. Again, like, there are so many teams, that we're going to talk about today. We're like, yes, they have their warts, but nearly everyone would trade rosters with them. Offensively, they were pretty good last year at drive efficiency. They were pretty good at explosive drives. They were pretty good at play efficiency and pretty good at negative drives. They definitely threw the ball around a lot more with Gabriel there than they ran the ball. I expect with Bedenbaugh there, like Bedenbaugh's background is a little bit more similar to what you might find with, say, a Lincoln Riley. He was an air raid guy, that came up through that Oklahoma system. The guys that went to go coach at Arizona under Mike Stoops were all Arizona, were all also Oklahoma type guys. So, I mean, I'm sure they've picked up some things from Lebby that they will also incorporate, but I'm interested to see what this offense looks like schematically. Defensively last season, again, like they weren't really particularly bad at anything. They were better at drive efficiency, finding ways to use the field to their advantage and get off the field. This is something Venables defenses tend to be pretty good at, but they did give up a few more big plays than you would have liked. Their explosive drives number could certainly improve, and negative drives, like they need to force more turnovers, force more 3-and-outs. They struggled defending the pass last year. They were pretty good against the run. They're going to need that pass defense to shore itself up. We've got them projected with the FCS game at about 8.5 wins ish, and about 4.5 in conference. The schedule again for them is pretty favorable. We've got, they should coast through the first 3 games as a tune-up. We're going to get an interesting view of them early on with Tennessee. I do expect the Tennessee offense. I thought the Tennessee offense was recession-proof under Josh Heupel. That turns out, of course, not to be the case. But I do expect them to take a step forward with a new quarterback. But Oklahoma should be favored in this game at home. Like Tennessee's defense has not put it together. But I am interested to see where this Oklahoma defense is. And this is going to maybe be the first game that gives us a real clue. Auburn, again, like Auburn's probably at the top end of their projection. Oklahoma is probably something like a 5 or 6 point favorite here. On the road, maybe that's down to like 2 or 3, but that's a game that, like Oklahoma, I don't think can overlook, even though they've got Red River the next week. That game against Texas, we have Texas as a very slight favorite in this game. We've got Texas projected at number 8 overall. I feel like that's pretty fair. We are expecting Oklahoma, like I think we are expecting Oklahoma to be pretty good. But like I said, like the schedule is pretty tough. This stretch here, Tennessee, Auburn, and Texas, like we should probably expect them to maybe drop one of these games in here, right? Like it's hard to pick out which one. But that is a tough enough slate where those games project to be close enough that it could potentially, because Tennessee's probably going to beat this number 20 overall projection with the new quarterback coming in to unlock things. South Carolina, this is a game they shouldn't overlook. They're better than South Carolina. This is this could be a tough year for Shane Beamer. But then the schedule really stiffens on the back part. And this is where if they did take a loss in that little stretch we talked about before South Carolina, you're probably talking about them not making the playoff because because Ole Miss, that's a game we have them slightly favored in, but like by the time we get there, that may be a toss-up. Missouri we have projected as a toss-up. Alabama is a slight favorite over them, and LSU is a slight favorite over them. I think LSU could come back. I think they're going to, like, this again is like probably the high end of a projection for LSU here. But I would also say, like, I would still expect LSU at home to be favored in this game. This is a very, very tough schedule for them. And again, now, I think where it gets interesting for Oklahoma is if they were able to get through Tennessee, Auburn, and Texas without taking a loss, or if they get into the back half there and they're just better than we expected, and if they're able to get through those two stretches there and only take one loss in each, you are, again, like, if you're only a 2-loss SEC team, we are probably talking about you as a playoff team. All right, South Carolina. I need a lot. I'm talking an absurd amount. So, Shane Beam. We're almost through. We're almost 3/4 of the way through. Shane Beamer's your head coach. Dowell Loggins is your offensive coordinator, and Clayton White is your DC for them. I'm still a little bit surprised Dowell Loggins is back, if we're being honest. Your likely quarterback is Lenora Sellers for the Gamecocks, but he only threw 4 passes last year, so I'm going to leave you with that. He's only thrown 4 passes last season. I'm not going to tell you the completion percentage or how many yards per attempt on 4 passes. The offense graded out last year at number 60 overall. They really struggled. They were at 44 in 23. They were at 35 in 22. We've got them projected as a little bit better than both of those coming into this year. But this feels about right for the South Carolina team. Like I said, they really struggled on offense. This was a bad Power 4 offense last season. Defensively at 31 overall, they were decent, kind of more middle of the pack. With the departure of Pete Lembo, they struggled a bit on special teams. They don't return a ton on the offensive side of the ball. They are going to need the defense to step up because they do return a ton on that side of the ball. And I do like Clayton White as a defensive coordinator. He did a heck of a job when he was at Western Kentucky. Coaching and development, they've certainly struggled. At 72 overall. Their recruiting's not bad. I mean, how bad they've been on the field, I think, is reflected in that coaching and development. Like, when you're decent-ish in recruiting and not great on the field, you're going to get a bad coaching and development grade. The offense last season, they struggled with drive efficiency. They couldn't sustain drives to be able to put up points. They were a little bit more explosive. They had significant offensive line problems. I don't know what Spencer Rattler got paid to go to South Carolina, but I hope it was just enormous amounts of money to go play in this offense. I thought that was one of the ones of, like, whoever was advising Rattler, like, really made a mistake on that call. Negative drives, they really struggled as well. I mean, too many 3-and-outs, too many turnovers. They could not run the ball at all last year. Rattler really, made the offense work. They could throw the ball a bit. That's something to keep an eye on as you come into this season with a totally inexperienced quarterback and not a lot coming back on the offensive side of the ball. I'm very interested to see what, if anything, this offense could do, because this wasn't a good offense last year. There's not a lot to potentially hang your hat on about them improving coming into this year. Defensively, if they're going to do anything, it's got to be on this side of the ball. Clayton White has to take this massive amount of returning production and turn it into something good. Defensively, they did a pretty good job on drive efficiency, a pretty good job on explosive drives, though that's, if you're going to pick out of the 3 big ones, that's the one I would improve on. They need to give up fewer big plays. Their negative drives, they did a decent job forcing 3-and-outs and forcing turnovers. They were decent against both the run and the pass. No real bias there. We've got them projected just at bowl eligibility when you count in the FCS game. Not a great SEC record, though. And as you're looking down here, they're likely going to be an underdog in a lot of these games. Old Dominion is a way to start out. Gives you a game that you can put under your belt. However, that Kentucky game, like we just talked about when we previewed Kentucky, this is a game both teams probably have circled. They're going to need to win, I think, in order to feel good about their season. The LSU game for them, I don't think, even with the problems that LSU had defensively last year, I think they're going to be a lot better. LSU should be a heavy favorite. Then you get Akron in. That should help you feel better about yourself. Akron's really bad. Then, you just start a real rough stretch, right? Like, you get Ole Miss, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Texas A&M. Those are all likely losses. I think if you're a South Carolina fan, you're hoping to sneak in here and get one win. If you can get one win out of that stretch in there, you should feel pretty good about yourself, I think. Because then you get because at that point, if you could get Old Dominion, Kentucky, Akron, one win from that group, Vanderbilt in your FCS game, you would be talking bowl eligibility, right? But you're gonna need to pick somebody off along the way there. Vanderbilt, of course, is really struggling, and we'll get to cover them. We've previewed most of these teams kind of along the way here. And it's part of why I think I'm getting a little closer on the times on some of these, is that I've actually already talked about the teams a bit. Clemson, I think, is interesting. We talked about them a little bit, and we were talking about Georgia. Offensively, they've really struggled. I think that could be a bit of a rock fight if the South Carolina defense is really able to put it together and take the step forward. But this could be a tough year for South Carolina. I would say if you're a South Carolina fan, you're going to want to see signs that the offense is potentially improving. I don't think Beamer's made great hires on the offensive side of the football. It might be time for another change there. If not a change overall at head coach, I think too, if they don't take much of a step forward this season. But if they don't take a step forward defensively, it could get really ugly. All right. The last four. We've made it, sort of. Tennessee, Josh Heupel is your head coach here. We've got them projected at 20 overall. They were at 26 and 23, bit of a step back from where they were in 22, because in 22 we had them at number 2 overall, behind Georgia, with just an excellent offense that season. They were right behind Georgia's offense that year. Josh Heupel's also your offensive play caller. Tim Banks is your defensive coordinator here. Nico, oh my gosh. And I listened so many times. I've just done so much talking. I've forgotten how to say it. So Tennessee fans, just forgive me. I am Alavea. That's probably pretty far off, but you know what? I did a little bit of homework, and then I've just done so much talking before we got to Tennessee. I should have written it out phonetically. Anyway, he was 62.2% completion percentage last season, 7.0 per. 20. We already talked about that. The real problem for Tennessee is they took a huge, and I talked about this a little bit. I thought their offense under Heupel was recession proof. That's not the case. They really struggled offensively last year. 27 overall with Joe Milton at quarterback. I do expect with the new quarterback and with Nico in that they're going to be significantly better offensively, but that needs to get unlocked. Defensively under Banks, they've been a bit stuck. They showed improvement under his first year, but they haven't taken a real big step forward. 35, which is where they were last year. That's not great. They're going to need to improve that number. Special teams also probably needs to improve for them in order to beat this projection. They're not returning a ton. They're at number, they've got 100 in overall offensive returning production, 110 on the defensive side of the football. I mean, the only reason I think we could talk about Tennessee with some optimism is I do think that Heupel's offense is really good. And I think if he's got a quarterback that can actually execute it, they have the potential to beat this projection here. I think one of the things that the defense eventually does need to take a step forward into the top 20 though. Offensively last season, and I had 14 overall in recruiting. They've got a decent set of players, in place there. At Tennessee, they just they've got to put it the offense has to be the engine, but the defense can't be, a drag on them coming into this year. Offensively last year, the offense was not the engine. They struggled with drive efficiency, being able to sustain drives and put up points. Explosive drives, they were all right at. They were actually pretty good at avoiding 3 and outs and avoiding turnovers. They were better running the ball than they were throwing the ball. That's something to keep an eye on. I expect that to flip coming into this season. Defensively, they were pretty good at drive efficiency, finding ways to avoid giving up long drives and get off the field, not give up points. They gave up a lot of big plays though. Their explosive drives number reflects that's where you could hurt them. You could hurt them with big plays, in particular in the passing game. Their negative drives number was decent. Again, that's a number that they could potentially pick up coming into the season. Like, the main thing is they need to clean up the pass defense and clean up giving up big plays. They were a little bit better against the run than they were against the pass last year. Again, like, big plays in the passing game absolutely killed them. We've got them projected at about 8 wins when you count in the FCS game. This North Carolina State game for them, I think, is going to be really interesting. I love the North Carolina State defensive coordinator. I think offensively, they've got a chance to be pretty good. I think North Carolina State does. We've got them projected at number 26 overall. This should be a tight game, but this is the kind of game that I think Tennessee needs to win, right? Like, Tennessee needs to come into this game with NC State and come out with a W. If they come out with a loss here, it's going to be interesting. But I think, if you're a Tennessee fan, you want to see the offense against what should be a really good defense for the Wolfpack. You want to see the offense be able to put it together in this game, right? Like, that's what we should expect. They get a nice tune-up game against Kent State, and then they get Oklahoma, a team that, again, like I think could have a really good defense. Venables is able to put it together here. I'm interested to see. I feel like this is a measuring stick game for both of these teams. Where's Tennessee's offense? And again, where's Oklahoma's defense? They get a break against Arkansas. I think they should beat Florida. I think that this is probably a top end projection for Florida. I think this is probably a mid projection for Tennessee. I think Tennessee maybe has more upside versus this projection than not. Alabama, I don't think that they're going to quite be able to hang with Alabama this year, but if they come in with a really good game plan and execute it, I think they have a shot. Alabama does, have some warts, I think, particularly in the secondary this year. They should be better than Kentucky. This might be more like 7 points by the time we get to this game. Then they have a real shot, to take out Mississippi State. Georgia's a tough one. We talked about, like, Georgia's going to be a tough game. We project them as the number 1 team overall. I don't think Tennessee has the horses. Georgia might need to turn the ball over 2 or 3 times. And then the schedule really lightens up for them when they get UTEP and Vanderbilt. I don't think this Tennessee has an outshot, a very, very outside shot to potentially be in a playoff conversation or something like that. I don't think this is that year. I think if you're a Tennessee fan, if you come away with 8 or 9 wins, and the offense is fun again, and looks like Heupel's got it going again, I think that's a win, and you take that to the bank. All right, Texas, number 8 overall. We have them projected. Steve Sarkisian's your head coach. Steve Sarkisian's your offensive play caller. Pete Kwiatkowski is your defensive coordinator, one of the better ones in the game. Quinn Ewers is your quarter. Boy. Truly a stupid amount of talking. Quinn Ewers is your quarterback, 69% completion percentage, 8.8 per. Which he did improve. He improved last year over where he was the year before, particularly in the back half of 2 years ago. But still, I think that there's plenty to unlock in this offense that Ewers needs to unlock. Offensively last season, I should say they were at number 9 in 23. In 23, last season, they were really good. They were at number 7 in 22, just a very unlucky team in 22, like one of the worst, some really, really terrible luck in 22. And Ewers didn't help that with the turnovers. They were at number 15 overall offensively last year. This is the number that they have to improve on. Sark is for my money, the best offensive play caller in college football. But he hasn't really been able to unlock it with Ewers. And I think one of the most interesting questions I have coming into this season, particularly because they did lose some pass catchers coming into this, is whether they can do it. Whether they can take the step forward offensively with Ewers at quarterback. It's kind of now or never for him. I don't expect them to necessarily get pulled this season, but if they are struggling to unlock the offense still, it would not surprise me to see a move. Defensively, they were really good last year, number 9 overall. Defensively, I think that's a number to keep an eye on. They do have some losses on the defensive side of the football as well. Special teams were pretty good last year at number 17 overall. Offensively, they do return a good amount of production. Like I said, they mostly lost, wide receivers. It'll be interesting to see how well they replace those guys, many of whom got drafted. The defensive side of the ball, they're not returning as much on that side of the ball, but I do think that they have a decent amount of depth at Texas. I don't think that they're quite. I mean, I think that they're and we talked about this with Josh Pate, and you'll see that interview. I think they feel better about where they are with the defensive, on both lines. I think that they feel a lot better with the depth that they have. I'm interested to see if they have something like the top end talent like they had last year, particularly at defensive tackle. Coaching and development's is pretty low. They've been recruiting really well though, number 7 overall in their 2-year rolling recruiting. Offensively last year, they struggled to put together long drives to put up points. You could point to some of that being play calling. You could point to some of that being execution. They were a lot better at putting up big plays last year. Their explosive drives number was really solid, and good at avoiding 3-and-outs and turnovers, pretty good at negative drives. They were better at throwing the ball than they were at running the ball last year, but I still feel like the key to unlocking this offense is not running the ball. It's Ewers in the passing game getting unlocked. Interested to see how well that comes out coming into this year. Defensively, this is a bit of a flip. If you were a follower of Kwiatkowski's defenses at Washington, they did a really good job of limiting big plays. This defense, and they would often give up a little bit in drive efficiency in order to prevent big plays. Like Kwiatkowski was famous for his 2 high safety looks at Washington's, where within the TV view of the field, the TV camera angle, you would often not even see the safeties in the picture. That's changed at Texas. You often do see the safeties in the picture. But they did, with that, they have been able to limit drive efficiency, but they have given up some, big plays. That's where they struggled a little bit. I think if they're going to improve, end up in the top 5 this year, they need to cut down on the big plays that they give up. They were much better against the run than they were against the pass. That Washington matchup last year was a little bit of a tougher matchup for them because Washington threw the ball so particularly well. They had a really good game in that one. So for them, they need to cut down on big plays, and particularly in the passing game. We've got them at 9 wins with no FCS game against a 12-game schedule. It starts out pretty well for them. They're going to be favored, even, maybe not by much, against Michigan. Michigan loses a ton off the title team, and I think this should be a really good matchup to give us an idea about Texas. Texas, I think, should be a slight favorite here in this game. And then there's going to be a stretch of games that they really should win. None of these games should be close up until the game against Oklahoma. And I don't think that there's, much of a likelihood for a look ahead against Mississippi State, but keep an eye out there. This Oklahoma matchup is where the schedule does toughen up a little bit for them. And it's always, it is always a tough matchup and a highly entertaining matchup against Oklahoma. I'm interested because this could be the year that you could potentially talk about maybe Sark's offense figuring it out and getting into the top 10, and Venables' defense figuring it out and getting into the top 10 when those two were hired. I think that's probably the thing I was most excited about, was getting to see a full-on Sark offense, getting to go up against a Venables defense in Red River. And I feel like we really have not lived up to that expectation, if we're being honest. I don't think Texas, the Super Bowl for Texas, though, is actually the next week. And I know the Oklahoma game matters a ton. But if you're a Texas fan and you have playoff aspirations, this Georgia, national title aspirations this year, this Georgia game is the one you have circled. And truly, maybe if we're being honest, is maybe Texas is building towards the Arch Manning, but they have a team that could potentially, make a run this year. But I don't think they're in Georgia's league. This year, they're going to have to unlock the offense, even with the wide receiver issues, losses, they're going to have to, get the defense to be as good as they have been, even with some of the losses they had. That's a tall order. I do expect Georgia. This is probably only around 10 points, maybe 7 points when this game is actually played. But Georgia does project to be a bit better than Texas. Texas does coming into this year. Then the schedule gets really manageable again, right? You got Vanderbilt. They should be better than Florida. Again, I'm not sure if Billy Napier is even still coaching this team at this point. They're better than Arkansas coming into this point. these games, it's like, don't turn the ball over 3 times and you should be fine. Then you get an A&M game. This is like the fact that this is the end of the year again for this rivalry being reinstated. Kind of a positive, I think, for Texas, because A&M does have some depth issues coming into this season. So potentially, by the time you get them, they could be struggling to fill depth. That's something to keep an eye on here. But this is, in all likelihood, there's, only if they come out of Michigan, Oklahoma, and Georgia with only 2 losses, this is likely a playoff team. If they come out of it with one loss, you can probably book Texas into the playoff. Texas A&M. All right. Look, I'm excited for this Mike Elko regime in College Station. A&M last season, Bobby Petrino was your offensive play caller. They did improve a bit from Jimbo calling plays at 24 overall offensively. Colin Klein is your new, from Kansas State, is your new offensive play caller for them. Jay Bateman, I was a little surprised when I saw Jay Bateman's name here. He was fantastic when he was the new defensive coordinator. And Mike Elko will likely have a lot of say still in the defensive play call. I was a little surprised too that he didn't bring Kevin Johns, his OC from Duke, with him. He did a really good job at Duke. Anyway, Jay Bateman was really good at Army. He was really bad at North Carolina, and Mike Elko believes in him. And Mike Elko is a really good coach. So we'll see how this goes to Jay Bateman. Chance to redeem himself after some bad years at Chapel Hill. The offense was okay. I mean, they were decent last year, 24 overall. The defense also was decent at 20 overall. I believe that was another DJ Durkin product there. Special teams, they need to improve this number at 31. They're returning a decent amount on the offensive side of the ball. They did have some injuries last year, particularly at quarterback. They're returning an okay amount too on the defensive side of the ball. Their coaching and development number stinks because they've recruited really well. Their 2-year rolling recruiting average is at number 4 overall. This they should just be a lot better. Like I said, I think they still have some high end talent in A&M. They have yet to, under Jimbo, I think, really maximize that in any functional way. Mike Elko cares about ball, and that's about it. And I'm interested to see what a team that has some real talent looks like with a coach that just cares about ball. Now, offensively last year, they were okay at drive efficiency. It's certainly a number that they could improve on, but it was probably their best number that they had was being able to sustain long drives for points. They struggled putting up explosive drives. That's something that's going to have to improve with Klein. But they did also give up too many 3-and-outs, too many turnovers. I think they have upside here. Connor Wegman's your likely quarterback coming off an injury, 68.9% completion percentage, 8.2 per. I mean, I think they have a real shot to potentially get into the top 15 offensively and improve on where they were last year. Defensively, they struggled a little bit on drive efficiency. You could drive against this team. They gave up long drives for points. They struggled a little bit too with explosive drives. That's still one that they can improve on, but they were pretty good at negative drives, forcing 3-and-outs, forcing turnovers. They were better defending the run than they were against the pass. They're going to need to clean up the pass defense a bit coming into this year. They were at 19-23 and 41-22. So, I mean, we are projecting them to improve again here. I think with some better luck, and I mean, particularly with injuries, this Texas A&M team could be decent. We've got them projected at almost 9 wins when you count in the FCS game. This Notre Dame game to start out the season at home is freaking fascinating. Notre Dame could have a really good year this year. I like their offensive coordinator hire, Mike Denbrock, coming back to Notre Dame. And I think Marcus Freeman had the Irish as a largely good, a little unlucky team last season. I like Briley Leonard matched up with Mike Elko, or not Mike Elko, but the Denbrock as his offensive coordinator. I think that's really we're going to get to find out a lot about both of these teams though. And I think, if you just went off of, if you're just like a fan that's just like, whatever, Texas A&M sucked last year and Notre Dame was pretty good, Notre Dame's going to win. I mean, we have Texas A&M as a slight underdog here, but it's not a lot. I mean, and I think Texas A&M absolutely has the talent and a much better coaching staff in place. They should be able to make this a game. If they they're able to pull off a win here, the schedule is actually pretty favorable because I think they're going to, unless they turn the ball over 2 or 3 times, be able to handle Florida pretty well. A little bit of a watch out there. Mertz was pretty good last year, and they did struggle to defend the pass a little bit. So if that pass defense is still leaky coming into this year, do watch out there. But they should be able to blow past Bowling Green and Arkansas. Missouri is a tough matchup, right? Like, and Luther Burden and Brady Cook, that's probably, I think, where, like, if the pass defense, it does turn out that they haven't been able to patch that, and maybe they did give up some yards to Mertz or Riley Leonard, then it's a bit ugly, right? Like then that game against Missouri could be a really, really tough game where Cook and Burden are able to light them up a little bit. Then you get in Mississippi State. I think this LSU game is probably more of a toss-up. Like, I think that this, LSU this is probably a high-end projection for them. I think A&M might come into this game favored by 2 or 3 actually in this one. You get past, then you get South Carolina. That should be a win. New Mexico State. Auburn, again, like, I think this is their top-end projection. This is probably closer to 5 or 6 points for Auburn, for A&M as a favorite here. And then this Texas game, this is where it gets tough, though, because I do think that against Texas, like, you're probably talking about a lack of depth by the time you've gotten here. Texas is a slight favorite in this game, even though it is on the road. Really interesting schedule, though, because you have a shot here for them to, if they were to take care of Notre Dame, maybe go on a little bit of a run. I mean, look, I still think they probably finished with about 3 losses, but you get lucky in one of those, and like I said, like a two-loss SEC team's probably a playoff team. And we did it, kids. Vanderbilt, one of my alma maters. Clark Lee is your head coach here for the Doors. Tim Beck, coming over from New Mexico State with his quarterback, is your offensive play caller. Tim Beck's a lot of fun sometimes less. I mean, like, he can be good, he can be bad, He had some good moments at Texas, but couldn't quite pull it together. He wasn't great at NC State. He was a lot of fun at New Mexico State. Clark Lee has taken over play calling duties for the Doors on the defensive side of the ball. Really needs to get the defense turned around. Their defense was just awful last season. There's not a lot of, major positives to talk about with the Doors coming this. Diego Pavia is probably your biggest positive, the quarterback from New Mexico State, total gunslinger, 60.4% completion percentage, 8.1 per. Going to want to get that completion percentage up a little bit. Although they'll be happy to take some shots for sure. They're at 107 on offense last year, 120 on defense. This is one of the really bad. This would be a pretty bad group of 5 team. Maybe middle of the road group of 5 team, but it was a really, really bad power 5, power 4 team. Offensively, they really, really struggled last year at 107. Just an awful defense. Lee has to get that cleaned up. Special teams were also really bad. They're returning a decent amount on the defensive side of the ball. So if you want to hang your hat on something, it's that you are getting a really good play caller taking over on the defensive side of the ball, and they are returning quite a bit of production. Their coaching and development has been abysmal, and their 2-year recruiting is on the lower end of what we would say for the Power 4. Offensively, they struggled at drive efficiency. They struggled at explosive drives, a little bit better at play efficiency, but they've had too many 3-and-outs, too many turnovers. They really struggled to run the ball. They did throw the ball a little bit better. I'm excited to see Pavia in this offense. I just hope it's fun. That's what I hope the Vanderbilt offense is with Pavia and Beck manages to be fun and interesting and has them in some games that they shouldn't be in. Defensively, they struggled to, they gave up too many long drives for points. You could get points on them with explosive drives. They were a little bit better at negative drives, forcing 3-and-outs and forcing turnovers, but they weren't great defending the run. They weren't great defending the pass. We've got them projected at a little over 2 wins when you count in the FCS game, and we don't have them projected winning a game in the SEC. It's a struggle. They start out with a very tough game at home against Virginia Tech, a team that was significantly improving last season, and returns quite a bit. Then you get Georgia State. This has to be a game that Vanderbilt expects to win. We've got this projected as a toss-up, though. That's real tough for them. It's quite possible that they would drop that game. I mean, you'd hope with Pavia and Tim Beck in place and Lee calling the defense, that's enough to get them over the hump there. Then starts out a stretch of games that are going to be really difficult. Missouri, Alabama, Kentucky. You have a real shot again, like with Ball State, to collect a win there. The days of Vanderbilt where you get to have the SEC East schedule to kind of help you out, where you can occasionally maybe make it to a bowl. You'll still have those years because of the way the schedule is going to break with these large conferences. I don't know that it broke their way this year. You get Texas, you get Auburn. South Carolina is a game that I think if you're like the South Carolina and Kentucky games, if you're if you want to be an optimistic Vanderbilt fan, those are the games to sort of circle on your calendar. That's where you want to see them maybe hang in there, make the game a little close. If they're going to really beat this projection overall, we're mostly going to be able to see it in those games. And then you get LSU and Tennessee in those games, are not likely to be close. I mean, technically Tennessee and Vanderbilt is a rivalry. It's hard to see them without a lot of turnovers, like being able to hang in some of these other games. And we've managed to finish this a little bit early for Vanderbilt. You have to hit a point where there's only so much to say. So, I'm excited. We've made it through. This is the first half of, slightly maybe more than half of our preview, and I'm excited to hop over and hold on a second. I jumped to the wrong screen. I'm excited to hop over to our interview with Josh Pate. And so right after this, you'll be able to come back and see us. We got Josh Pate to come on with us and talk the SEC.
All right. I'd like to welcome Josh Pate, the host of Late Kick Live on CBS Sports, to help us preview the SEC. Josh does a great job previewing all of college football, and covering all of college football, but I think in particular has a really good feel for the way the SEC is, based out of Nashville. Sort of like, other than Atlanta, maybe the other unofficial headquarters of SEC country. I'm excited to have you on and talk some SEC here. Let's get started with the newcomers. I think that, I think that's an interesting question here. We've got Texas. They return a really good amount on the offensive side of the football, outside of wide receiver. The defense was really the strength of the team last year under Kwiatkowski. Ewers has had his struggles, I think, getting Sark's offense fully rolled out. Can he take the step forward required this year to get Texas over the hump?
Possibly. Is that a good enough analytical answer for you? Possibly. I can kind of see it. You know what worries me a little bit about that is actually not backfilling their receiver depth. So if you and I were to have talked a month or a month and a half ago, I would have been skeptical of all the Texas rumblings of, don't worry, we'll just reload and we'll move along just like we did last year. I'm not a believer you just backfill. I think they had 3 or 4 pass catchers go in the top 3 rounds of the draft. So it helps that we're doing this a little bit later in August, as you and I are talking, because I've been able to, get legit feedback from inside their camp. Rob, I'm not sure receiver may be their issue. I think they backfilled very, very well at receiver. They're very happy with where they're at there. Versatility, not just the depth, but the versatility and being able to move guys around. But the running back situation there, and the reason I mentioned this in conjunction with Ewers, is when you're zapping your running back depth and you don't have a dependable guy back there, not just on like short yardage situations, that's its own conversation. Yeah. But I'm just talking about when you're playing the Georgias of the world, when you're in these 2 or 3 big games and you've got an air of predictability about your play calling, that to me does not lend itself to seeing quarterback elevation. Now, what we may see is you and I may be talking in December and he threw for more yards, but that's just because maybe he had to. But I don't know that the efficiency metrics stand to peak any with them this year because they've been dealt a bad hand in fall camp.
Yeah, I mean, like if you looked at like 2 years ago versus last year, I mean, I think he certainly cut down on some of the really, really bad play. Like the back half of 2 years ago was really bad. I mean, he had some horrendous games with some mistakes that really cost him what was largely a pretty good team. Last year, I think he took the step forward and like cutting down on the egregious stuff, but I don't think he really hit like the kind of peak that you'd like to see in a Sark offense that can kind of unlock, I think, everything Sark could potentially do. That's my, I mean, if I have a big question mark for a team, it's actually one with the returning quarterback that everybody's talking about in the playoff contention this year, oddly enough. Not a team like my big question for Texas is at quarterback. On Oklahoma, they're in a bit of a different spot. Oklahoma, they return a lot on the defensive side of the ball. They've only been pretty good under Venables, though, on defense. They haven't taken the kind of step forward. I tend to think of Venables as like the best defensive coordinator in college football when he was at DC. I've been expecting him to kind of put his stamp on the defensive side of the football. Bedenbaugh, I think, is going to be fine as offensive coordinator. I actually, because the last time he was a full-time play calling OC was at Arizona. They left some points on the board. This is years ago under Mike Stoops in the red zone, but I think he'll be fine as a play caller. But they might need Venables to deliver a vintage Venables defense this season. I think for them to hit expectations and really, I think have a good time in the new SEC. Do you think they can deliver that this year with what they have coming back defensively?
Yeah, I actually do. There's there's something that happens a lot of times in August when people start coming back to the table. They start reading their magazines, and so what you just said is an accurate description of Oklahoma, not surprisingly. But a lot of people will realize that in August. They'll say, oh, wow. So turnovers may still be a little bit of an issue with this team. Offensive line's a major issue. They're going to have to win defensively. Well, that's your realization in August. They've known that pretty much since the end of last year. Right. So that means they've modeled their entire conditioning program. They've modeled their entire spring protocol. Everything's been built around knowing that. So then you get fall camp. And no, it's hard to hear bad news a lot of times holistically out of fall camp. But above and beyond what the norm is, it sounds like defensively, especially the defensive front, they've been pleased with where they are so far. Yeah. So, a million different depth concerns could pop up down the road. But the one thing I guess that still is a question mark in my mind, not a weakness per se, but a question mark is you saw Jackson Arnold, quarterback there at the end of last year, had the turnover issues. Okay, it's a bowl game. They still had those issues in spring. It wasn't publicized a whole lot. Those practices aren't open to the public, but so the feedback I got from there, it's still an issue. And so I'm like, okay, totally understandable. That's what God invented spring for. It's still an issue. Well, I think there was a little bit of a refusal to accept that from the fan base because I remember bringing it up and got a lot of pushback. Like, what would you know about that? No. That's just all rectified now. Well, it wasn't rectified. Okay, so then we get in fall camp. And through as you and I are speaking, they've already had their first scrimmage. So through their first scrimmage, still a little bit of an issue. Okay. So I can get by with Oklahoma because I think Sawchuk, the running back, is in line for a pretty big year. I can get by with them running the ball, playing hard-nosed defense. What I can't get by with is two of those being in place, but turnovers still being an issue. Because that is the difference in probably the outcome for a team that profiles to play several one-possession games. That's the outcome of 3 or 4 games swinging one way or the other.
Well, I mean, they outplayed Arizona in that bowl game for sure, right? I mean, like they dominated both sides of the line of scrimmage, right? Like it was turnovers that absolutely doomed them in that game, right? And even for an Arizona team defense that improved a lot, like I think it was 5 turnovers in a bowl game. That'll do you in. Having those kind of turnovers, that's not a good sign for them at all coming into the season. To your point, I think really, like, I mean, anytime you're in a 1-possession game, like turnovers are going to be, like if you're at -1 on turnovers, like you're in a lot of trouble. You get to -2 in turnovers, you're probably dropping the game. Georgia, like, I've got him projected at number 1. I just finished, like, Bill Connolly got his final, returning production numbers out. Georgia, finishes the projections and beta rank at number 1. They returned the quarterback, both coordinators. I think the thing that would, and I think last year, I think if Georgia had made a 12, what would have been a 12-team playoff, I think they could have come in as the favorite in Vegas for that playoff last year. They were a really good football team. defensively, they've been a little off from where they were under their championship years. They weren't there last season. I think the thing that would make Georgia sort of like more of a sure thing in my mind coming into this year would be defensive improvement. I don't think the offense is going to be under Bobo what they were in the prior 2 seasons. I think they're still going to be really, really good. But can they get there defensively to where you would think that they could be to maybe make them more of a sure thing coming into the season?
I don't think they're going to get to a sure thing. And honestly, I don't see a sure thing out there as we sit here and talk in August. So a couple of things here. The first is they are not vintage Georgia up front defensively. And if anyone watching or listening doesn't believe me, Kirby Smart is actually brutally honest about this sort of thing. Like, you don't have to have access to him behind the scenes. He'll just tell you. Now, what happens is he's so honest about this stuff, a lot of his own fan base thinks, oh, no. He's just downplaying. No, he's just luring the media. He's really not. He's really not doing that. He's telling you we don't have that kind of depth that we've had maybe in years past. I think their strength may be off the edge as they go through fall camp. I think they've discovered some guys that play winning football for them off the edge. But, man, internally, there are a lot of names who have been there for a while. But I think them and Bama both, they've got good, dependable names in the interior. They don't have game records on the interior, okay? That doesn't mean they can't win with them. That means they're not going to take games over with them, and that leads to a lot more variance in outcome, as you know. So all of a sudden, when I'm going on the road, in fact, Rob, I got them playing 6 teams I've got rated 21 or better in the country. They play 5 of 6 of them away from home. 2 of them are neutral, 3 of them are on the road. So if I can't take over games, I may win all of them. I'll probably be favored in all of them, or either a slight dog on the road at Texas, maybe. But I am not going to put games away. At least in my mind, I'm not going to. The other thing with that, though, is if you think back to last year, if they make the playoff, they're a favorite to win the whole thing. This year, I've got them power rated number 1, too. Vegas will have them power rated number 1 to start the season. Okay, so let's say there's this scenario where they lose overtime field goal to Texas on the road. They lose to Bama 24-23, games decided in the final minute. That doesn't change the eyes of an odds maker much. So there's a world where 10-2 Georgia gets into the playoff as a 7 seed and would be favored against anyone they play as long as it's neutral. They'd be favored against anyone they play. There's a world where we have a 10-2 team favored to go the whole way. So that's just something to think about in the expanded era.
Well, I mean, we talked about, and I think you were kind of on the same boat last year of like, listen, it's like nobody came into last year as like the sure thing, right? Like it was much more wide open. And I think I said coming in when I previewed Michigan, I was like, hey, they like keep an eye on it. Like it's opened up enough that a team like Michigan could win it. Georgia's like, Georgia's is kind of in that same boat of like, hey, like you're really good, but if you have a bad game where you get out schemed by Nick Saban in the SEC championship like they did last year, or you just have bad turnover, like you could drop a game, right? Like nobody's good enough to like be that sure thing to go undefeated. I think coming into the season, at least on paper, as we're previewing and coming in, somebody could emerge and really put it together, and maybe it could be Georgia, but I think that's really good feedback on that defensive line in particular. So I think you and I are on different sides of this one here. I tend to think Ole Miss was pretty good last season, maybe not as good as their record. A lot of people have them pegged as kind of like the dark horse coming into this offseason. I think even like Nick Saban has talked about like they went out and got some guys on the defensive line to really help them out and compete. I don't think I like Pete Golding at Ole Miss. I think he's a good fit for that level of program, right? Like he's a good defensive coordinator, and I don't think that they've had a gangbusters defensive coordinators there, under Kiffin. Can you talk yourself into them taking like a big step forward though defensively this season? I think that's where they really need a little bit more help. They were kind of a middle of the road Power 4, Power 5 defense last year. Can they take enough of a step forward to really compete for the SEC title this season?
Off the top of your head, do you know where they rated just defensive metrics last year? Would you have any idea of that?
Yeah, I could pull it up real fast.
So as you pull that up, I will say my impression of Pete Golding is you're not going to have an elite defense under him. I would never dream to want to be standardized top 10, top 15 under him. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, they were 33 last season. So I mean,
Okay.
that's just pure middle of the. You put Power 5 on a 1-69 or however many it is this year's. Power 4 teams, right? Like in that range. That's kind of dead in the middle.
Yeah. So if I've got Golding, I'm thinking to myself, I'm not trying to wish cast my way into a top 10 defense.
Yeah.
I think his ceiling is below that. What I'm trying to do is go from 33 to 23 and opportunistically, like my red zone numbers, my havoc numbers, my turnover rate. That's what I'm looking to do to flip games because I trust what I've got coming back on offense. The biggest question on that team is probably health and cohesion defensively. And then the other side is the offensive line to me, because you cannot convince me until I see you play that you've just taken a bunch of portal pieces and you're going to stack them on top of each other and it's just going to work. Like if you try and link up a train, it looks good in the yard. But this right here, you don't really know until that engine starts pulling. And similarly, I don't even know that we'll know week 1, 2, or 3 because they've got kind of a preseason of sorts baked into that schedule.
Yeah.
They don't start fast, unlike some of these other teams. So I don't know. What I do think is personnel-wise, at their top end, they can compete with the big boys. So that's a mouthful. But I've got to leave it there. But what I'm saying is, I think they've got time to figure themselves out. They don't need to have themselves figured out by week 1. And number 2, I think there's been such an emphasis put on 2024 being the year. Like if you think the Michigan mentality last year, I'm not saying they're a developmental program or anything, but Michigan was all in on 23 because they knew all those guys were going. They had no clue NCAA wise either what was beyond the horizon. So it was all about 23. That's Ole Miss to me in 24. Like, I know some Ole Miss fans want to convince themselves this will be every year. This will not be every year. You will not have this kind of shot every year. Yeah. And so if it's going to come together, it's got to come together this year.
Well, so I think people are focused on Jackson Dart, but like under Kiffin, I mean, and even going back to his FAU days, he's run a little bit more of a run-heavy offense, and like he tends to play action into what Dart's doing and take advantage of the defense creeping up. They had an exodus of talent at running back, if you will, and they missed out. Krosky Merritt, oddly enough, like who was probably the top running back in the portal, ends up not at Ole Miss, even after he had indicated he was going to go there. He ends up at Arizona. Do they feel good about what they have at running back, even behind that, portal rebuild offensive line? Feels like always a big red flag to me. But yeah, do they feel good about what they have at running back behind that?
Yeah, probably one of the bigger surprise statements that you'll get from scouting types and you'll get from coaches at Ole Miss is we're not even that concerned about running back. We'll be fine there. And so that's from the Ole Miss staffer side. From the NFL side, I was talking to Jim Nagy. He can just go on the record with it. Jim Nagy directs the Senior Bowl down here, and so is very, very dialed in on the scouting front. And I've seen him a couple of times over the past couple of weeks, and he said, Ulysses Bentley is a guy they got there. He was under-recruited, and they got him there. He's been there a couple of years now. He flashed a little bit last year. Scouts actually have him graded higher than Judkins on some of their future boards.
Okay.
So that's not a guarantee of anything, but in terms of raw talent, they don't think that they are, like jumping into the soup and bread line anytime soon just because Judkins went to Columbus.
Yeah. Oh, that's good news for Ole Miss. I mean, to TBD on the offensive line. So the other sort of like popular dark horse coming into this year is Missouri. You've got Luther Burden coming back, quarterbacks coming back. You do have to replace the defensive coordinator, who's now going to try to have a V-shaped recession, if you will, for LSU's defense. Where does Missouri sort of fall in all this? I think that they're a reasonable projection. I've got them projected just outside the top 10 coming into this season. That may not get you very far in an SEC that's still pretty tough and rugged, I think, and adding in Texas as well. But where does Missouri kind of fall in all this? I think that like they're a very popular pick, I think, because I think a lot of people, when they look around and they're doing an evaluation into the preseason, they tend to look at like head coach back and quarterback back. But I think the defensive coordinator missing is a big question.
I think DC and that defensive line coach, both of whom went to LSU, it's a big deal. Now, full disclosure, so we were up there in spring, and they were very comfortable that they had backfilled there. They were comfortable with these departures that they had developed well enough where they could backfill and they could elevate on their depth chart. Here's the skeptic in me. I am willing to blindly believe that about 4 or 5 teams in the country. Missouri's not one of those teams. So I have to trust but verify on them. I think they are I'd call them one of the best developmental outfits right now in the sport. So it's not that I don't trust that process, but keep in mind what we're asking them to do. We're not asking, this is not the old Missouri standard. We're not asking them to prove to us they can win 8 games with guys we don't know. All of a sudden, the standard is, well, you guys won double digits and beat Ohio State in the bowl game. No one remembers the context. They just remember that it happened. So now this year, well, your quarterback's back, which is like the only stat that matters in preseason magazine world. Number 2, you've got a really workable schedule, right? They play one top 10 team, that's Bama on the road. Other than that, it's looked at as just what are your 2 biggest games? Split those and win the rest of them, and you can go to Atlanta. And I understand that sentiment. I don't know that I'm ready to blindly believe that. I'm looking at my numbers right here. You said you had them. Where did you have Missouri pegged to start the season?
I think I've got them at just at 11.
I got them lower than that. I got them all the way down at 20. Now, granted, I have got a 2.5 point gap between 20 and 11, so it's not that wide.
Yeah.
But having said that, there's a path for 20th rated Missouri preseason to figure themselves out and to split their biggest 2 games. And they could absolutely be in the conversation for Atlanta in mid-November, which is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and you bring up a really good point here. I mean, I think that like in these much larger conferences, all of a sudden the role of the schedule dice, in the preseason is going to determine a lot, right? I mean, and all of a sudden you're going through team schedules and you're just like, who's got the easiest path to potentially double-digit wins? Missouri does line up that way, and it's a big reason I think to potentially believe in them. But like losing Blake Baker is a huge loss off of what was a really, really good defense. That is probably my big, because I'm not sold that they're going to put up like massive offensive numbers, even with everybody coming back that they have there. I want to flip it, and this is one where I have to have some mea culpa. I thought the Tennessee offense was recession proof last season. I was proved very wrong about that. I thought Heupel would figure it out like he did in his first season in Tennessee when they were more run oriented and he just kind of worked with what he had. I thought he would find a way to get the most out of Milton. Milton really held him back last season. New quarterback in, of course, like played pretty well in the bowl game. They're really high on him. I don't think the Tennessee defense is going to take the big step forward under Tim Banks. I haven't seen enough progress there to make me believe that they're going to get into like a top 10 defense, at any point. But can the offense get them back where they are, nipping at Georgia's heels, even if Georgia really had their number, sort of in the rankings? Can they really bounce back offensively this season?
Yeah. So the team 2 years ago, they had the number 1 offense in the country, and they beat Bama, and then they go to Georgia, and it's really like a crowbar in the bicycle spokes. They can do nothing against them. And I think that's because they did not have the horses up front. And so Georgia knew all we had to do is just this right here. Just lean on them all afternoon. We'll be fine. Most boring game I've ever been to. Then it started to rain at the end. So the team profile is a little bit differently this year. So the first thing is the quarterback piece. I got full confidence that Nico Iamaleava will improve week over week. He's going to be one of the best players in the country. Total stud. Have no doubt about that. I think that there are some underutilized receiver weapons they had last year that were not Milton-proof, if you want to put it that way, that along with Brazel, the kid they got out of Tulane through the portal that they love, really, really popped in spring. They'll be fine there. Offensive line's a question that they think is less of a question. They're all focused on their secondary because their secondary was already sort of this blinking red light. And then they lost one of their most dependable and versatile pieces early on in camp, the kid that was going to play the star position for them. So that's the reason that there's a ceiling on that defense, because I don't know that at any point this year, the best hope for Tennessee, I think, is to be average to slightly above average in the secondary, which means maybe a similar formula to what we were talking about with Ole Miss. You've got to be a lot more opportunistic defensively, and you don't have to be a top 10 unit because your offense affords you the opportunity to be that. But that also means it's a really unpredictable team. That's the kind of team that can go 8-4, 11-1, and either way, you may look at it in the postseason and go, Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Judging by how it played out, we have a bunch of, one score games that are in the like first to 41 ended up winning. That makes sense. So that just means they may be one of the most fun teams in the country to watch. It also means it's a nightmare to try and actually predict what their record's going to be.
Well, there's nothing I like for me. And I grew up in Wyoming watching Joe Tiller, coach Wyoming, right? Like going against Lavelle Edwards BYU team. So like for me, like fun is like a 35-30 game. Like fun is not some like watching Iowa's offense and Iowa's defense, right? Like Tennessee sounds like it could be a real fun team because they're going to give up some points and going to have to score some points, right? But I'm going to flip it to it. Like, talk me out of off the ledge of like jumping into the pool with like Mike Elko winning 9 games at A&M, because like they have some talent. Of course, they have some losses. Like, there's some, they have some depth issues, but like having an actual football guy that's really focused and, is going to keep the team focused, and like getting guy. I think he did a tremendous job turning around Duke. And getting really good buy-in from the players there. I think he's going to instill that in A&M as well. Is A&M, I've got A&M projected just outside the top 10, just mostly on pure talent level. They weren't terrible last season. They just had some really bad luck too. But I think Elko could get everybody pulling the rope in the same direction.
I've got him at 11, so I'm right there with you. So I'm not talking you off any ledge. I'm holding your hand as we jump together. That's what we're doing. They could be a playoff team. Like they're in the mix to be a playoff team this year, which takes my mind as we sit here in August all the way to the end of November. 2 things people are vastly underestimating. The first is Mike Elko, the impact of, because that is a bona fide upgrade, whether people realize it or not. And I'll get back to that in a second. Number 2, everyone loves rivalries in this sport. I do too. You do too. That Texas game at the end of the year, when they go into Kyle Field, if there's even a whiff of playoff contention or conference championship contention on the line, I think it could be a top environment that we've ever seen in the sport. Do you remember this obscure game 2 years ago? Texas went up to Arkansas. No one circled the game in the preseason except Arkansas folks, but they remember the old Southwest Conference days, and they had this hatred bottled up for like 2 decades, and Texas came in there splattered, total buzzsaw. I think that was like a preview version of what that game against A&M will be. So I think what you talked about with Elko is very, very important here. Most of the time when you get a job, it's because the previous guy got fired, which happened here. Most of the time when the guy got fired, that means you've got a fairly sizable rebuild project on your hands. But that is not the case here. Even with a lot of that 2022 recruiting class going its separate ways because it was never really put together like a real recruiting class, there's still a lot of really good talent there. They've got a quarterback that, if healthy, can play, top 10 caliber football. I think that locker room was so starved, that program was so starved for structure and for organization that they've really embraced it, and they've taken a dive in. Now, whatever that means this year is whatever it means. I think they've got the potential to be a playoff team. So I've done my A&M preview. I imagine when I do my A&M preview, I'm going to be right there in line with what you just said, though.
Yeah, I think if you take somebody, I think Elko, in kind of a sneaky way, was really the right hire for them. There were some other names that were kicked around for that job, right? And including Fish at Arizona and Stoops at Kentucky. And, somebody stepped in a la, like the hire at Oregon, like a couple of years ago where they didn't have Phil Knight's assent to who the coach was going to be. Somebody stepped in and said no and got Elko in that seat. And I think it was probably like one of the sneaky best hires of the offseason, I think, given and we'll see how you recruit, but you have an embarrassment of riches to be able to recruit at A&M. Anybody should be able to do okay at it. I'm curious as we jump in on this, LSU was a catastrophe defensively last season. There's no, they weren't when we say a middle of the road Power 5 defense, they weren't that. They were a middle of the road Group of 5 defense. They were in the 90s last year. I like Blake Baker, like I think you could have a huge bounce back, like schematic. I mean, just getting the right guys in the right places, like defensively. But they lose Mike Denbrock, who's a perfect fit for Jaden Daniels. And like I think there's that old, saying in football that you can't improve a quarterback's accuracy. Jaden Daniels did improve his accuracy when he went to LSU. I mean, his first year at ASU was a lot of Ayuk yards after the catch, right? He threw a lot of short stuff because he wasn't accurate down the field. Cleaned that up in large part, and he ran a ton. LSU is one of the most interesting teams in college football for me because they were so good offensively last year, so bad defensively. You got two new guys who haven't called plays, in the co-offensive coordinator position, right? Like, can they bounce back enough on defense, but could they hold serve on offense? It's like a really big question mark for me. Like, they could go any number of ways.
Having lived in the South my whole life, let me tell you, you just gave 200% of the LSU preview narrative, because part one for you was, can they bounce back defensively? Okay. You added something that is not added in the South. You said, but can they be good enough offensively as well? It's just assumed the offense will be there. It's all defense. Just if we bounce back on defense, we'll be fine. Like we've bookmarked offense. And so my answer is no, I don't think they can.
Okay.
I have taken a fair amount of heat for this, and that's before I've even put out my LSU preview. Their win totals the same as Tennessee, the same as Alabama. Fascinates me because I don't see them as that team. So a couple of things here. The first is, not just did they add that defensive coordinator you spoke of there, they added Kevin Peoples, the defensive line coach. They added Bo Davis from Texas. I've got it as the most upgraded support staff, either side of the ball, any program in the country. So that tells you what I think about the personnel they brought in on the staff. But they whiffed in the portal, so they did not address any of their interior defensive front needs. That's just going to be what it is. Their secondary was a sieve last year. I am not a believer that you can remake that overnight. And then that's period. So then we go to the other side of the ball. Jaden Daniels, you did a good job chronicling his evolution as a passer. He was their leading rusher.
Yeah.
So they lose all of that production. Now I'll tell you where they do feel like they can make some hay. They have not been good traditional rushing. Their tailbacks for a while have underperformed. They think the offensive line is the nucleus of that team. They don't think that. They know that. I think everyone knows that. But they also think at the tailback position, they are equipped and in a better depth spot probably than they've been the last several years. So they think they can run the ball. But Nussmeier is not a runner. He's been there. He's a program guy. Like, he's the kind of guy I root for. But in order to offset or supplement some of that production, it's going to have to come from maybe a different style than you're used to. And the other thing is losing 2,700 yards of pass catching. Kyron Lacy, I think, is ready to take the step, but there's so much that we just talked about that you're asking just magically elevate. I don't see it. So it's a team that's going to have to prove me wrong by overachieving instead of underachieving.
I never bought into that narrative that Brian Kelly couldn't recruit top end pro style quarterback at Notre Dame. Brian Kelly chose to recruit guys who could run the ball a bit more and didn't necessarily and could improvise a bit more because that more fit his offensive style, right? Now he's got a guy who actually, I'm not sure if it's his offensive style, but is that more NFL type quarterback, right? And I'm with you. Like, I always tell people, anytime you got a brand new play caller, mileage may vary, right? It's we'll see, right? Until the rubber hits the road, when you're out there watching somebody play chess live, right? How it's going to actually play out. I'm interested. How is Hugh Freeze going to ruin somebody's day this year? I mean, how can Auburn come in and just be everybody's for maybe 2 or 3 times this season, just absolutely, maybe not pull out a win every time, but just upset somebody's day? 'Cause he's a really good offensive guy. I think they've got some holes in the roster, of course, right? But can they play spoiler in the SEC?
Yeah, I will describe Auburn in a way that people who have never watched football can perfectly understand. Imagine your toothpaste tube. If you're like me, at least, you don't refill it when it's 3/4 of the way empty. You let it get all the way down to the end, and you've rolled it up. And so you get to that point, Rob, where you actually have to set the toothbrush on the counter because you're going to need both hands to squeeze, and hopefully enough toothpaste comes out to where you can get one more brush out of it. That will be Auburn this year. There is somewhere in the tube each week, there is enough toothpaste to win. One week it's going to be Peyton Thorne just kind of has a day on you. And those freshman receivers, and they are aliens, one of them especially, those guys just have their day. But that doesn't show up the next week. So the next week, your defensive line needs to force 2 turnovers and needs to be in the backfield all afternoon. And then Jarquez Hunter, really good and probably the most underrated tailback in the conference, he needs to go for 175 and 2 scores the following week. It's not going to come the same way any given pair of weeks. And most weeks, against the bigger boys, it may not be there. But the answer is, of course, because Hugh Freeze ruins someone's day every year. And so he will do that this year. They will be able to be competitive in every game they play. This is also the same team that by no accident lost by 3 scores to New Mexico State. I believe it was at home last year.
Yeah.
It is the quintessential roller coaster team in the SEC this year for reasons totally different than why Tennessee could be that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think Freeze gets there in a year or two, right? Like, I think he's just got a roster to build, like, and when I say gets there, I mean, gets like a really, really competitive team that could potentially win 10 games and make the playoff kind of thing. Right. Let's talk about, I like the DeBoer hire a lot. Like, I'm just going to assume that Nick Sheridan, who went last time he was calling plays in Indiana and got fired because he was really bad at it, is going to be fine with DeBoer there to guide him there. I like the Kane Womack, grab. I thought he was really building something at South Alabama. And probably, I'd be surprised if anybody, after how it's gone with Billy Napier at Florida, like, I think he probably saw the writing on the wall of, like, if I move up to Alabama, I can get a bigger next head coaching job if I take this DC job. But they got problems in the secondary, and can they fit the pieces together, I think, this season to make a playoff run? I think a real question for me is, because they lose a ton, on the defensive side of the football as well. What's reasonable for Alabama this season, right? I mean, like, they just take a little bit of a step backward, under Saban in the last couple seasons with O'Brien, and then Tommy Rees as offensive coordinator. What's reasonable for Alabama? Where should Alabama fans feel about, and I say this is like potentially the most spoiled fan base in America after having Nick Saban as your head coach, right? Like, how should they feel at the end of the year if it's like 9-10 wins, or what should be the goal?
Big gap to me between 9 and 10 wins. In reality, it's not, but perception wise for them, there'd be a big gap in 9 or 10 wins. I don't know that I'd be happy with 9 wins. I think it's a really, really good team. I've got that staff graded as a top 10 staff. I have got the defensive support staff graded top 15 in the country. So just pause there for a second. If you were to have told someone any generic year, Nick Saban's going to leave Alabama, what's the best you could hope for? Yeah, I think DeBoer is a top 3 coach in the country in his position, head coach. So there aren't many I rate above him. If you told me they'll replace the best with a top 3, I would take that 9 days out of the week. But if you also told me that defensive support staff would actually get a slight uptick in quality, that's what would be surprising to me, because the quality of Saban's staff beneath him waned a little bit in the last couple of years, because the industry sort of knew the end was coming. Candidly, the talk in the agent world was he'd be gone after Bryce Young was gone. So Nick Saban was actually around a year longer than a lot of people in the agent world expected him to be around. So couple of things here. They've got really good quarterback depth. Milroe's the starter there, but I've been told more about Ty Simpson out of their fall camp than Milroe, and that's not because he's outperformed him. It's just because you're not going to hear a lot about Ty Simpson. So they're in a really good position there. I think there are a couple of receivers on that team, like Kendrick Law, Kobe Prentice, just guys like that, former 3-4-star guys that kind of got lost in that Alabama shuffle. And they brought in Jeremy Bernard from Washington to be the wide receiver 1. I think because of him, a lot of those wide receivers can kind of fall into their proper place instead of trying to elevate one rung too high up the ladder.
Yeah.
The offensive line's what interests me, because I think from a run blocking perspective, they'll be really effective. I think they got 3 backs that they can win with. Milroe is a glorified running back when he wants to be as well. Pass pro in this offense is even more important than in the Reese offense.
Yeah.
And so that's what I wonder about. It's not, it's the difference. There are weaknesses and then there are questions. That's a question to me, but they have to perform there, because I'm like you. They got some studs in their secondary, but they're all young. They haven't played. Xavier Brown's a name that I just think by the end of the year, true freshman All-American type kid. But, I mean, Dre Kirkpatrick was that for them. D. Milner was that for them. Notre Dame, when they faced D. Milner, they went right after him. Clemson, Oklahoma went right after him, because even 5-star true freshmen get targeted in that league. So I think it's a 10-win caliber team. Like, I think it's a fringe playoff caliber team. And anything less than that, it wouldn't be, you know, fire DeBoer time or anything like that. Right. I would be slightly disappointed if they weren't in that mix at the end of the year.
Well, I'm interested because like with the pass pro, like last year, Washington's offensive line got a lot of plaudits. I think it reminds me a little bit of that LSU offensive line in Joe Burrow, and you had some guys that were really good route runners. You had a great scheme getting them open, and you had Joe Burrow, who was processing really quickly, and they could run zero protection a lot. Right. Like, I mean, so you have Penix, who's been in this offense for a while, understand its processes are really fast and knows when guys are going to come open. Right. Like that makes a big difference too. And I'm interested to see if like you can put a ceiling on if like Milroe's not processing it, and they might have to go to something different. And I do think that there's plenty of options with Milroe of like, if you have to make the offense, you know, look different, if you've got to run the football more, they'll be fine. Kentucky, a team that like I kind of wonder if they missed their window, right? To like, you know, like you're not sitting there against an SEC East schedule type, you know, anymore, where you just get to sit back and like win a bunch of easy games and, you know, then just like maybe lose to Georgia and still pile up some wins. They've taken a step back offensively from where they were in their really good Liam Cohen year, and then it didn't work out in his, you know, Liam Cohen the return. Where do you sort of see them shaking out? Because like I think they like I think Stoops has obviously raised the floor there. What's the ceiling now? I think for Kentucky's a really interesting one. The defense hasn't been where they I think wanted the last couple seasons either.
Yeah, floor at Kentucky, I think it's fair to say, has been raised. Obviously, that's fair to say. But ceiling's what I always focus on. I don't think the ceiling's been raised a whole lot. Having said that, I mean, it's a huge testament to Mark Stoops that they're continuously at the level that they're at. It's like a rich man's version of what Campbell has done at Iowa State, because Stoops has kind of got him there every year. And so I'm looking at my numbers right now. I've got him power rated 26th to start the season. That's right there with Oklahoma State and Iowa and Louisville, like teams like that. So, you know, if I plopped them down in another conference, maybe we're having a different conversation. It's going to be a good, solid team. The same platitudes we always use about Kentucky will be used. They've got Brock Vandagriff up there at quarterback now. I assume he'll have some moments, but I mean, by and large, beat the teams you're supposed to. Probably don't beat anyone you're not supposed to. That's kind of the role I think Kentucky plays again this year. Yeah.
And then real quick, last question. I think I'm interested in, Florida, the schedule's horrible. The defense was also horrible. And I think a lot of people have this circled of like, even if Florida was a lot better than we expect, and I've got them projected to be pretty decent. Like they still have a lot of talent, even if they haven't been there schematically in play calling. What's likely for Florida this season, right? Like, I mean, I feel like cruising towards like a better team, but still around like 6 or 7 wins seems likely.
7 wins would be significantly over their win total. Yeah. Which dropped down to 4.5, by the way. Oof. So I hit up some of our odds-making buddies over at a book that doesn't sponsor your show, so won't be named. And I asked them, do me a favor and take Florida, give them Syracuse's schedule or give them Iowa State's schedule. It bumped their total up like 3.5 to 4 wins in some scenarios. So that's what we're looking at here. So I don't know that there will be a fair way Florida ever gets judged this year. I've got them sitting at I got them at 21 to start the season.
I think I've got them right at 20. So we're in the same boat.
I got them playing like 6 or 7 teams rated above them. So there's a world where if it just played out the way it should on paper, they're the 20th best team in the country and they go 6-4 or 6-6 or something like that. Quarterback play, really efficient, really important for them to have that back this year. I think, there's some intangible stuff here. Special teams miscues. The one thing I disagree with Napier on, we went down there this spring. He sat down on the show with us for a little while. And I asked him, like, what are you doing to fix that? And he said, well, if you take out a couple of instances last year, we were pretty good on special teams. I don't think you can say that about special teams because a couple of things, it's like the proverbial turd in the punch bowl. Doesn't matter how the punch tastes at that point. So I have no clue how to expect on that front. I know they made some changes internally staff-wise, but I don't know what kind of fruit that's going to bear. But overall, the level of player across the board will elevate this year. The level of depth, I think, really will elevate this year. What's it worth on the win-loss total? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time. I know you got to run. This has been great. Thanks for coming on. This is Josh Pate from Late Kick Live on CBS Sports. And thanks for coming on and previewing the SEC with us.
A pleasure as always, my friend.
All right. And thank you for tuning in. And now I can't get that to load up. Hold on. Son of a goat. So thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Rob Bauer. I'm the econometrician behind BetaRank, the advanced stat system for college football. You can find all the stats you saw today and a whole lot more at sharpcollegefootball.com. You can find me at BetaRankFB, also at Sharp College Football. And you should tune into the YouTube channel, check us out, give us a subscribe or a like, or leave a, nasty comment about, counting stats at Sharp College Football on YouTube. But thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you soon. We have another great guest on to help us preview the ACC.